For context, my dad grew up with this man called Bruce and considered him one of his best friends. Bruce was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his late teens, and my dad, being the kind and caring soul that he is, stepped in to be his guardian. I say that lightly. I mean, he always helped Bruce out when he was going through an episode. Growing up, Bruce was always around. I saw him as another father figure in my life. He lived in a small town 2 hours away from my city, where we also had a holiday home, so he was constantly coming up to stay at ours. He was kind, calm, and patient, as well as being an amazing artist. Almost yearly, Bruce went through phases of refusing to take his medication. This then triggered an intense manic episode, some of which I have witnessed, and are frightening to see for a young child who only knew this person as quiet and calm. He would do and say things far beyond his control and couldn't quite grasp reality. And that unfortunately is where it begins. I was 12 years old when this happened, so it was around 10 years ago, but still feels fresh in my mind. Every summer, my family and I would take a trip down to our beach house, which was Bruce's town. Our little house was a one-room unit where us kids would usually sleep in the lounge, but for Christmas, our parents brought a massive 3-person tent for us to sleep on the front lawn. So while my parents slept up in the house, we got the tent. A week before my dad had to drive back up for work, he got a strange call from Bruce, although at the time, I didn't know what it was about. I could see the concerned look on my dad's face as he told Bruce, "No, I won't do that." After further arguing, my dad hung up and murmured to my mum about something. "I'll sort it out," and my dad left. I asked what was wrong because my mum's expression turned into worry. She shrugged it off and told me not to concern myself, and that was that. Later that night, I heard from my mum talking to my auntie that Bruce was refusing to take his medication unless my dad withdrew money. From what I know, my dad's in charge of Bruce's finances and his bank account because Bruce has a meth problem. Bruce has a son who is trying to stay clean from it, and after Bruce tried and failed to get his son to buy him some meth, he turned to my dad, who also refused. I totally get it. He's an adult and can make his own choices, but my dad didn't want to enable his drug problem. My dad stepped into being a guardian of Bruce, so that's his job. This is where everything goes sour. Bruce started threatening to stop taking his medication ever again, and that he hadn't been for weeks. And then he started threatening to harm my brothers and I. He said to my parents, "They trust me. It would be easy." My mum freaks out and tells him that she's calling the cops. The police arrived at his house to see the whole property was empty. He had fled and was hiding somewhere that made everyone uneasy. Nothing really happened in the next coming weeks, and it was time for my dad to drive back up to the city for work. Mum felt okay staying down with us, and of course the 3 kids were oblivious to all the commotion that was going on. So, we were too. Everything is good for the first few nights. Dad's gone, and that's when it starts going downhill. It's around 3:30 a.m. My brothers and I are sound asleep in the tent. My mum up in the house is also fast asleep when she wakes up to a booming of texts from Bruce. They're all blank, but since this is the first time hearing from Bruce since he threatened her kids, my mum is now wide awake and in full-blown panic mode. Bruce rings her and she answers. He doesn't reply, instead breathes heavily on the phone for 10 seconds before hanging up. The second time is the same. Mum asks where he is, but he hangs up on her. He rings for the third time, saying, "Back deck," before hanging up. My mum hears a loud bang from the back of the house and quickly calls the police. The only way to the back of the house is by going through the front lawn, where my brothers and I were sleeping. I don't remember much, except being shaken awake by my dad's best friend, who my mum called in tears, and coming into the house to see 3 police officers standing around. My brothers and I were now wide awake because we were curious as to everything going on. And then this happened. My dad came back down for us with the news. Bruce's son had come up to him in the city to apologize and confess that he was told to come to end the life of our family in exchange for a large sum of money. My dad was in shock and rushed back down. Bruce was back in hiding again. My mum let everyone who knew him and was close to him know what happened, and if he did come to them, was to let the police know who will immediately detain him, as he was considered dangerous and mentally unstable. The crappiest thing was one of her supposedly best friends who knew him let him stay at hers instead of calling the authorities. Side note, they have only started talking again recently after my mum forgave her. As the summer started to wind down, we returned to the city to find a few terrifying things. My mum and dad came home to one of their bathroom windows smashed and dirty footprints everywhere. For some reason, nothing out of the ordinary had happened until my older brother, an avid cockatiel lover, went out to check our aviary birds to find they were all missing. Not one was there, and we assumed they must have escaped and flown away, until Dad got a nasty surprise opening our barbecue to see that all 10 of them had been cooked alive. My parents can't prove it was him, but after all that has happened in regards to Bruce, it probably was, especially after finding out what Mum's friend did. To make matters worse, our neighbor heard and saw what was going on when we were broken into, but didn't bother to ring the police or even let us and my parents know. We were furious. She made an awful excuse about being home alone and never having witnessed something like this. So, to Bruce, a man I knew was another father figure in my life. You may have bipolar disorder, and you can't help that. But after what you put my family and I through, I hope we never meet again. I do sanctuary work at festivals and burns. For those unfamiliar, sanctuary spaces are these events generally refer to encampments that are set up specifically for people who are not a medical risk or an immediate security risk, but have probably eaten way too many psychedelic drugs and need someone to keep an eye on them and be nice to them for a few hours. It may involve allowing them to talk through some difficult stuff, going to town on a coloring book, or just providing a comforting silent presence. Trip sitting can be a thoroughly rewarding experience. The team I work with sets up a large, elegant domed tent at events that is open for anyone who needs a break from the festival environment, which can obviously be overstimulating at times. We also usually have a few smaller tents intended for people who may need to be escalated and not too keen on being around groups. However, on the weekend in question, we grossly underestimated attendance numbers and did not bring the small tents. This will be an important detail later on. I was assigned to the late night shift, 4 AM to 8 AM, on both the Friday night and Saturday night of the festival. There was a small and low-key crowd in the tent on Friday night, mainly folks just chilling and talking quietly, appreciating the music in the distance. And I took a brief note of one fellow in there who seemed ordinary enough. He wasn't speaking and his eyes were quite enlarged, but that is not out of the ordinary for guests. He appeared content keeping to himself, so I didn't interact with him much. For some reason, I had recurring thoughts about the guy the next day. It was a small festival, and I saw him walking around a few times with those same dilated eyes and tightly clenched jaw, always by himself. Now this isn't necessarily a red flag at the time, except this happened to be a festival where a lot of people knew each other, and the telltale signs of tripping tend to wear off after about 8 hours. Each time I noticed him, I grew increasingly uneasy, but dismissed it as irrational paranoia and went about my fun. Saturday night rolls around, and I was excited to catch the set of a DJ I liked before my next sanctuary shift. As I was boogieing, I saw the bug-eyed dude about 10 feet away, staring straight ahead, with that same static expression and 1,000-yard stare. Irrational or not, I felt the need to create more distance between us and quickly moved to a different part of the crowd. No sooner had I done that and resumed my dancing, did I look to my left, and there he was, now 5 inches from my face, eyes like saucers, exclaiming, "Hi!" I was so startled that I booked it way from the stage area and thankfully bumped into a friend who helped me laugh it off. 4 AM rolls around, and I'm sharing this story with my co-staff, whom I consider good friends and colleagues. The person in question is called G-Man, and not a minute after I finish recounting my "what a creeper" anecdote, a golf cart rolls up like clockwork, and out of it steps guess who, googly eyes? Normally our golf cart transport comes to us via the medics or security team, and they'll fill us in on what they can about the person who needs help. But whoever was driving this one unceremoniously dumps this weirdo into our care and speeds off into the night without another word. I silently signal that this is the guy I had been talking about, and G-Man takes charge. For reference, I'm a woman, so it would have been more appropriate for G-Man to do so even without the pre-context. Googly Eyes says he needs to use the bathroom, so G-Man escorts him to the Porta Johns, only to come back alone 10 minutes later. Turns out the googly-eyed man was making lewd comments to the women in line for the Porta Johns, and when G-Man tried to gently redirect him, he decided he was tired of male company and told him to piss off. We never force people to stay at the sanctuary, and G-Man was visibly irritated by the encounter, so it seemed for the best. Case closed. Right? We decided to check in with one of our homies in security just for due diligence, and it turns out they'd already spoken with the dude. I can't recall why, but it was for a minor infraction. The moment our conversations wrap up, 2 things happen at once. 1. A couple of my friends arrive escorting a young, half-nude woman to the tent, so I immediately spring to action. And 2, our friend Googly Eyes takes this opportunity to reappear out the darkness like damn Beetlejuice. He hasn't done anything severe enough for us to ban him from the sanctuary, since we deal with people in altered states. The threshold for bizarre behavior is very high, but as I mentioned earlier, we were also lacking from the privacy of our smaller tents. The young woman probably would have benefited from some time in one anyway, given her condition, but I particularly didn't want Googly Eyes anywhere near her. With both of them now here in the same sanctuary space, I did my best to create a physical boundary discreetly as possible. My two friends, both female, stayed with us for a little bit, while trying to make her feel at ease. She was alert, but non-verbal, and had been distressed and distorted when they found her. Googly Eyes immediately starts inching closer to us, intermittently butting into our conversation, his tense jaw stretched into an unsettling grimace. I can practically feel him eyeing all of us up, especially the girl we were trying to take care of, who was still rather exposed from the waist up. At this point, G-Man and our shift leader, who had been roaming around the grounds until then, who we'll call B-Money, and another male team member who was off shift but hanging out in the space, are there. G-Man, who has an eye on the situation, but can't do a whole lot at this point because Googly Eyes has already flared up at him, and intervening could have exasperated matters. Nevertheless, I'd had enough of him for the night, and quietly go over and tell the guys that I'm uncomfortable. B-Money is a pro at this kind of work, and immediately develops a plan. He approaches Googly Eyes and gives him a series of odd tasks. Hey man, can you inspect this rock for me? Hi friend, can you watch this sage stick? Googly Eyes is clearly struggling with these complicated instructions, and asks B-Money to leave him alone. B-Money says, "That's fine dude, no worries, but first, can you arrange these colored pencils?" At last, Googly Eyes gets flustered and huffs off, and every muscle in my body relaxes. We have a lovely remainder of our shift, chatting and doing art until the sun comes up. We even get our other guests to laugh a little bit, and by dawn, she is able to talk and walk back to her campsite independently. Sunday Funday on the last day of the festival is magical, but I'm wrecked by afternoon and drive home to decompress. The word on Facebook come Monday is that someone was taken into custody by local law enforcement on Sunday evening in connection with some thefts that had been taking place over the weekend. But I didn't get the full story until a couple of weeks later, when a team member of ours does a debrief. Turns out that a number of tickets had been hustled and sold at a discount to locals near the festival property, which happens to be in an area of the rural south, where you paddle extra fast if you hear banjos. In other words, some tickets wound up in the hands of folks who were not there for the music or the yoga worship. One of our team members had to run off to some Duck Dynasty extras who showed up at our sanctuary looking to get some, demanding to know where them topless women were at. If you haven't already guessed, one of those discounted ticket holders happened to be Googly Eyes, who also turned out to be the guy that got arrested for some of the robberies. Once apprehended by festival security and turned over to county police, they also discovered that he was on meth, hence the eyes and jaw, and was in possession of a handgun, presumably the whole time he was lurking in the sanctuary. Googly-eyed man, get your stuff together, and let's never meet again. A friend of mine used to work at Disneyland in Florida. He was standing at the entrance for the line and had to tell a family that their child was too short for the ride. They could switch off and ride the ride if they wanted, but one of them would have to stay with the child. They said okay and walk away. Well, the child was young enough to be wearing one of those leashes that you can put on your kid, and maybe 20 minutes later, we saw the kid a little ways away, by himself, tied up to a light pole. So my friend Rob resolved to wait a minute before calling it in. Maybe they were in the bathroom, not that that makes it okay. Anywho, 15 minutes later the kid is still tied up, and so Rob calls security. It takes security maybe another 10 to 15 minutes to get there, so the kid has been tied up for at least the better part of an hour. They come and see the kid and say, "Hey, wanna come with us? We're gonna take you somewhere fun." And the kid is excited and goes with them. Rob's shift doesn't end for another 3 hours, and he doesn't see the family come back. While the next guy who comes and replaces Rob sees them come back later and freaks out. By the time the parents returned, they found a manager and found what happened. Their child was already with social services. They were from out of state, and they had to go back without their child and return at a later date for a court hearing. I went to a fairly large middle school that had kids from at least 3 cities in the area all going to it. From there, I went to a small high school with maybe 300 kids in total. My high school was a highly competitive charter school located in the mountains and surrounded by several acres of woods. I met this guy, Sam, in middle school, but didn't really interact with him much. It was more of one of those friend of my friends things. Fast forward to my sophomore year of high school. Sam transfers into my high school, and my high school did some block schedules. So we had 4 classes and a sort of study hall / homeroom class in the middle of the day. Sam transferred partway through sophomore year, and I didn't know how this happened, but he ended up in 4 out of my 5 classes, counting homeroom / study hall. At this time, I had established a bit of a reputation at the school for being helpful and a good student. So when Sam transferred and seemed to be having a tough time, I was asked to take him under my wing and help him out. Boy, do I regret doing that. One of the classes we had together was a history class that I also had with one of my best friends. Despite her protests, my teacher made the 2 of us work with Sam on all our group projects. Sam was already kind of creepy with me, even though he has been at our school for less than a week. When we started working together, he would sit uncomfortably close to me, and at first he wouldn't say much, but as he got more and more courage, he began talking to me. At first, it was all normal stuff. I had an older boyfriend at the time who was in the Air Force and stationed in Japan. I know that sounds like one of those lies high school girls make up to get creepy guys to back up, but this was true. We were childhood friends and had began dating shortly before he enlisted, so I made sure Sam knew I wasn't looking for anything more than a friend. But it didn't take long before he started flirting with me. His flirting quickly escalated from compliments to asking if my boyfriend Alex was real, to trying to steal the purity ring I wore every day on my finger, and joking that one day it wouldn't be just the ring he was stealing. I was freaked out, but I figured there wasn't much he could do since we only saw each other at school, and he didn't know where I lived. Back when I was in high school, the chat that's a part of Gmail now called Google Hangouts was like the AIM messenger of the time, so everyone used it, and there were several group chats that I was a part of for my school that used personal email addresses rather than our school Gmails. Through this, Sam got my email address. He started sending me creepy, explicit emails about the things he dreamt about. I won't share the one I have saved, but they were gross, especially to a Christian virgin girl. He often had some part about me moaning how I loved him, not Alex, over and over again, Eventually it got so bad that one of my friends reported what was happening to school administration. They basically sent out an email to the entire school administration that Sam wasn't allowed to communicate with me at school. This freed me from everything but the creepy emails that came in on a weekly basis, at least until the end of the year. Junior year, Sam was keeping his distance, but we had a class together, so we had started interacting at a minimal level. I mostly just ignored him and hung out with my friends though. Senior year is when things started getting really bad again, and I didn't realize how bad they had actually been in my junior year until this point. We both took advanced martial arts as an elective class that year, which meant not only did we have to talk, we actually had to spar and train together. The worst thing about this is that my high school gym was a 3 to 5 minute walk from the rest of our campus, and you had to walk through a trail through the woods that I mentioned earlier to get back there. Sam would wait for me every morning at the top of the trail before school, and at the bottom of the trail after class, just so that he could walk with me. Although he usually walked a good 5 feet behind me and didn't talk to me. At this point, my long-distance relationship was beginning to fall apart, and Sam saw this as his opportunity. He started telling me stuff about how I was his soulmate, and I just didn't want to see it. He also told me that he had drawn some kind of rune that eternally bound our souls. Don't ask me what that means. Sam was into all sorts of Wicca, dreamwalking and other magic stuff that I wrote off as stupid jokes. As we came up on the end of our senior year, some of my teachers started asking me about essays, short stories and poems that I had written and turned in during earlier years. I eventually found out that Sam had been taking my old writing out of the trash at the end of each year when I cleaned out my locker, and thrown out all those old assignments I no longer cared about, and was turning them back in as his own work. I insisted I knew nothing about it, and my school decided to search his locker. The thing was like a crazy shrine to me. He had piles of my old homework and assignments that I had thrown out, and 4 or 5 composition notebooks that I used to keep as diaries and poetry journals that I assumed I had just lost at some point. The school assumed he was simply keeping my work in hopes of turning it back in and getting better grades so that he could actually graduate. But it felt really creepy to me. The school took all of my old work and made me take it home and suggested I not throw out assignments away at school, or I would get into trouble for letting him copy me. The thing is, the other thing they found in his locker that they didn't care about, but I did, was several word magnets that my friend and I had made to leave notes in each other's lockers. I know they were the ones out of my locker, which meant he also knew my combination. A few weeks after they raided his locker, I was getting changed back into my regular clothes after my martial arts class, and discovered that my bra and my extra workout shirt were missing from my locker. I reported it to the school, but nothing ever came of that. I'm fairly sure Sam stole them, but I've never been able to prove it. After that, he stopped talking to me for the most part. I had a new boyfriend who actually went to our school for the last 2 months of senior year, and Sam was terrified of him. The only thing that happened was that one of the composition notebooks I had, completely filled with quotes and poems, went missing, and occasionally the magnets and other things in my locker seemed to magically rearrange themselves in ways that didn't make sense. Some of my friends knew my combination, and although they swore they'd never touch my stuff, I just figured it was them trying to be funny. After graduation, I figured that I was finally free of Sam, but instead, he began to stalk me more closely. At first, it was just emails from accounts I didn't recognize, asking for things that didn't make sense. I marked these as spam and ignored them. Then he made an account under the same name of one of my former friends from high school. I thought it was actually my friend Becca emailing me, so I responded. We carried on a pretty normal email conversation for a few weeks, and then she got weird. She and I had talked about our relationship and things like that, so she knew I had a boyfriend. She started asking me to send her nudes, and insisting that if I didn't, she would hurt herself or try to end her life. She used to send me pictures of the deep cuts on her arm, or even counted the pills she took when I refused to do what she asked. Becca had told me she was living somewhere in Colorado, so I was pretty sure I couldn't call anyone and say someone I knew was threatening to do what they were doing. I'm not proud of what I did, or that I fell for Sam's games, but I did what I was told for fear of being responsible for someone's death. This went on for several months until I finally got tired of it and actually deleted my email address. Things were quiet from there as I started my first year of college. However, I soon found out from a friend of mine that Sam was attending the community college, which is within walking distance of the one I was attending. I didn't think Sam knew where I was, so I figured I'd be fine, and I was for about the first month. Sam started showing up outside my classes. At first, he would just stand there in the sea of people leaving my class until he knew I saw him. Then he would walk away. This started to really freak me out, and at the time I had no friends at the college and no boyfriend to intimidate Sam. After a few weeks, I started getting emails to my college email address. They always came from different email addresses and had no subject, and always had 4 attachments. They were always me somewhere on campus, eating, in class, heading to my car, even photos of me heading into the bathroom. I reported everything to campus police, but they told me that unless I could prove who was doing this, there wasn't much they could do about it. I established the habit of getting on and off campus as quickly as possible, and not talking or interacting with anyone. After my first semester and Christmas break, things calmed back down for a while, and I started trying to make friends, which turned out to be a big mistake. I had started working in a store in my local mall, and I hadn't heard from Sam or Becca in several months. Sam started showing up at my work that January. I worked in a home decor store, so the store had pretty narrow walkways between the displays, and it was next to impossible to notice someone coming up behind you, and the cameras in half the store were dead. At first, he would just wander around, and if I was working, he might do something, like break something in my section of the store. One of my co-workers actually saw him do it a few times. I worked on a rotating schedule, so I worked different times and different days every week, so he couldn't just wait for me to show up. If he went to the store and I wasn't there, he would ask when I was working, claiming to be my boyfriend. After 2 or 3 times of my managers and co-workers asking me why my boyfriend had come in asking for my schedule, did I find out it was Sam. I explained the situation to my managers, and they let everyone know that if Sam showed up while I was working, they had to alert the manager and me, so that I could stay in the back. They were also told to tell Sam that I no longer worked there, in hopes that he would stop. It took my manager threatening to call mall security for him to finally stop coming to my work. After that, he went quiet again for almost a year, before popping up on my social media again last year. He claimed that he had changed and that he wanted a second chance. Me, being the stupid person that I am, and always wanting to give people the benefit of the doubt, and only seeing the best in people, started to rebuild a friendship with him. At this point, I was actually single, but was trying to build a friendship with this guy that I had a thing for a very long time, who is now my fiancé. It was only a week into us talking before he started being creepy again and begging for nudes and sending me messages like the emails he used to send me in high school. My now fiancé, then my best friend, although he asked me out within a few weeks of this, signed into my account on Snapchat and basically ranted at this guy, telling him to leave his girlfriend alone, and the next inappropriate message he sent me would mean my boyfriend immediately blocked his account and he would never speak to me again. After that, I tried to put some distance between us, although I tried to be friendly and answer when he talked to me. After a few months of this, Becca made a reappearance. She started talking to me on Instagram as someone completely different. We spoke for a few weeks before she started sending me messages that made it clear it really was Sam. My fiancé and I have a theory that Sam decided to bring Becca back as a way to attempt to make me dependent on Sam again. She went back to her old tricks of the self-harm and the threats. Except this time, Sam used the timed photo thing on Instagram and his little sister to really add a punch to it to make me truly believe she was trying to hurt herself. I told her that I knew who she was and that she was lying. She threatened to blackmail me with old images I had sent her way back in my first year of college if I didn't send her more. Instead, I told my boyfriend, and he used his tech nerdiness to check out the metadata on her photos and discovered that they were screenshots from some other account and that this person actually lived in the same state as us. We reported Becca to both Instagram and our local police and spoke to a lawyer friend of mine about the things she said and then blocked both Becca and Sam. The only thing that's happened since then is that a few accounts have popped up on Facebook and whisper using my images, both the appropriate and explicit ones, and claiming to be me. My fiancé has a search algorithm set up to find them, although as soon as one comes up, it's down before either of us get a chance to report it. It doesn't happen consistently, and entire months go by between incidences, but honestly, I wish it would just stop already. Sam, please, leave me alone, and let's never meet again. When I was younger, my older cousin lived with us for a bit, because she was having behavioral problems at home. My parents had to go at night to pick someone up from the airport, so they left my brother and I with her. My brother and I were both in bed in my room at this point, as I think it was a school night, and she was up in the other room doing homework. But she finished up, so came into our room to lay down with us. But as soon as she opened the door, our house alarm started going off. She quickly shut the door and came over to tell me to be quiet before going back to close the door since it didn't have a lock. My brother, who's a year older than me, woke up very confused, and the alarms were going off, and we were all scared out of our minds and couldn't even call for help because her phone was taken away and we were too young to have one. Our only option was the landline, the one in the kitchen and the one in my parents' bedroom. So we all get ready at the same time and run into my parents' room and lock their door. My cousin checks their bathroom and closet to make sure no one's hiding there, before calling my parents to let them know what's happening. They say they're only 2 minutes away and not to worry, but let me tell you, those were the longest 2 minutes of my life. After all is said and done, we find out through the alarm company that the window in my parents' room is what tripped the alarm, and that's the room we went to. To this day, my parents are convinced she was just trying to sneak in a boyfriend or something, but I'm certain someone was trying to rob the place or worse, and got scared off by the alarm because of how completely terrified my cousin looked. I am a woman that works night audit at a small hotel property in a small-ass town. I'm used to working alone, and it takes quite a bit to scare me or freak me out. I have dealt with domestic disturbances, hostile homeless men twice my size, and helped get rid of the prostitution problem on our property over 2 years ago. So when I say that this man really creeped me the hell out, know that it means a lot. Let's start from the beginning. What is it with this week? Every night has been some other dumpster fire for me to put out, but oh boy does tonight's particular creeper take the cake. So I'm sitting at the desk browsing Reddit as you do, when a guest heads my way from the first floor rooms. I don't think much of it. He gets up to me and picks up a brochure from our rewards program and starts asking me about it. It's legit my job to answer these questions, so he starts his questions standing catty corner to me and ends up right in front of me. He says thanks and leaves. Was he kind of awkward? Yes, but not anything I haven't dealt with before. 5 to 10 minutes pass, and here he comes again. This time saying that a friend of his is supposed to come and collect him, and wants to know if anyone has come by asking for him. I tell him no, and that no one has been here in a while. Honestly, this was my first mistake, but hindsight and all that. He paces back and forth in the lobby for a few minutes, before asking if he can stand to the side of the front desk, almost right next to me, as something was wrong with his neck and he couldn't see out of the door properly. This was the second red flag, because there was a couch directly in front of me that had a section that if you just sat there you could face the door/parking lot. But apparently I lost my mind tonight. I reply with, I guess, and he stands there and starts asking questions about his room, saying that he was supposed to be transferring to a suite tomorrow, and we are an all-suites property. I say I didn't know anything about that, but asked for his last name to check, but he wouldn't tell me. He kept mouthing something at me, and then whispering something just barely audible. It really seemed to me that he wanted me to lean in to hear what he was saying, but there was no way I was going to do that. By this point I was already uncomfortable and just stared at him, telling him several times that I am hard of hearing and that he will need to speak up. When that didn't work, I asked him for his room number so that I could look it up that way, and he said he couldn't remember. Okay. I asked what floor he's on. He said he didn't know. Now, I watched him come from the first floor rooms, and I knew he was staying down there. I just wasn't sure which room he was in. So now I know that for some reason he doesn't want me to know which room he's staying in, and for some reason this makes me start to feel very unsafe. He finally gives me the last name, Johnson, and I tell him we have no one here under that name. He says, oh, maybe it's under my boss's name, but I can't give a name for that either. He then says maybe it's under his company name, but told me he works for the highway patrol for a small mechanic shop called Joe Dirt Mechanics, and that he works general construction under a contractor whose name he doesn't know. While he tells me all this, he keeps doing that weird whisper to trying to get me to lean closer to him, but my brain is flashing red neon warning signs and screaming, danger, danger, as loudly as possible. So I print a random piece of paper off the computer and tell him I need to step into the back office to make some copies. He seems to take the hint and heads back down the hallway, leaving me free to freak out in the back room, but also free to grab my pepper spray. As I walk back out, I realize that instead of actually leaving, he just moved around the corner out of sight to wait for me to come back to the desk. I feel better armed with my pepper spray, and I'm ready to haul ass and lock myself in the back office if he tries anything. This time he doesn't stay long, just asks about the restaurant that he can see out the window/door. He wants to know if he would be safe walking down there by himself. I tell him it would be fine, and that I walk down there myself all the time, and have never had any problems. He angles for a ride a little bit, but I lied on this one and told him I didn't have a car. He leaves and heads down to this restaurant while I'm just glad this seems to be over. He's gone for 15 minutes when he returns carrying a cup from the restaurant, saying he didn't like the food there. I tell him that's too bad and make myself look busy with paperwork. He seems to take the hint and leaves again. By this point, every interaction with him has left me feeling more creeped out and unsafe than the last, and I start texting my husband to let him know what was going on. The next/last time I saw him last night, I heard him coming down the hall because he was on the phone, and when I looked up he was staring at me really intently, so I gathered some papers and went into the back office to avoid him. I heard him pass the desk and go out the doors, so I peeked into my manager's office to see him standing at her window, peering in trying to see me from there. I called my husband at that point and told him to get his ass up here because I couldn't do this anymore. As I'm on the phone, I get the courage to peek back around the corner to the manager's office that he was peeping into and notice he is gone, and told my husband to be on the lookout for this guy walking outside of the hotel or between the hotel and the restaurant. I look out the window and didn't see him anywhere, but go back in hiding just in case. My husband comes flying into the parking lot and comes in to find me hiding in the back, telling me that he looked everywhere and couldn't see anyone. Within a minute, this creepy guy comes in the front door trying to talk to me over my husband, but after a very murderous look from my wonderful man, he booked it out the lobby and didn't return for the rest of the night. I had my husband stay to play security guard just in case anything came of it, but nothing did. Until the morning when the housekeeper filling in for regular breakfast attendant let me know that the same guy was around yesterday morning and was denied a room by our manager for creeping out the housekeeper. The manager even had to go with her to take out the trash because this guy was so unsettling. Apparently he came back after the manager left for the day and got a room from the one man on the front desk staff. I worked for the Disneyland Hotel for more than a year. I work in one of the many departments that would need to deliver things from our department to the guest rooms when they needed them. One night, at around 11:30 at night, I was making a delivery when I heard a group of children laughing from the pool deck, which is surrounded by a gate. Since I was heading to a guest room, and they'd been given a wait time, so they'd know exactly when to expect me, I didn't stop to see who was playing in the pool and to check that they were being monitored by at least an adult. After delivering what the guest needed to the room, I headed back to where I was supposed to be waiting, when I heard more children laughing from the pool deck, as well as some splashing. Since the pool water itself is well lit and the pool deck is poorly lit, I expected to at least be able to see some kids playing in the pool and something resembling an adult within easy hearing range. By the time I had walked up to the gate, which is covered in plants, the laughing and splashing had stopped, and I could see that there was no one anywhere near the pool or pool deck. it really makes me wonder what I heard. While I know there have been deaths at the hotel and in its rooms, with the most recent death happening weeks before this posting, all of the deaths have been adults, making me wonder what I was hearing. I've also been deaf in my left ear since childhood, so any sounds I would have to have heard would have been quite loud. When I was 13, I moved from my hometown in Tennessee to a whole new place in northern Michigan. There, I met my best friend Lena. Anyway, she's like my twin sister. That's what we call ourselves. Lena has two younger sisters, Katie and Marina. Lena and I had a friend called Bear. We also had a friend who I would later date named Ronnie. Ronnie and Bear knew a girl called Mandy, who is the antagonist of this story. We met Mandy in high school our freshman year. She's 17, we're 14. No big deal. Most of us hang out with older kids anyway. She was a little annoying, but we dealt with it because Bear had a crush on Mandy's older brother. So the stalking wasn't really starting at first. Mainly, she was annoying and tried to tag along with us for everything, and was mostly just generally a nuisance. She had a class with Lena, and most often would hang out around her before and after. Eventually, Mandy began to crave Lena's attention. She would tug on Lena's hair in class when she was talking to our other friends, be very loud and aggressive towards them when she was told to hold on, and shoved herself into Lena's personal space. She would take pictures of Bear, Ronnie, Lena and I, and anyone else who she knew, and post them all over the internet. Ronnie had explicitly stated that he didn't want pictures of himself on the web, but she posted them anyway. She went as far as to use the pictures she had taken of them without their knowledge and posted them without her consent as her Facebook profile picture. She went to Bear's apartment one day and ended up giving her a ring. Her parents got angry for I can only guess why, and Mandy decided to lie and tell them that Bear had stolen the ring from her. She then told them that Bear had lost it. This got Bear into deeper trouble with Mandy's parents, despite it not being true. They later learned it wasn't the case, as they found out Mandy was stealing money from them constantly. Mandy started getting worse and worse. I confronted her about her physical abuse towards Lena and told her to either leave her alone completely or stop being so irritating, and told her that I would personally kick her if I heard she had been physically harming her again. And for a while, it stopped. She began showing up to places we were going and forcing herself into the group. One very important example of this was a birthday party Lena had. She was turning 15, and it was a cosplay party. She showed up unannounced and uninvited to Lena's home in a Halloween costume, feigning ignorance when we told her she'd not been invited and she wasn't allowed to be at Lena's home. She showed up to Ronnie's house while he was alone, prompted me to get rather angry as she had a crush on him, and she claimed she knew I was dating him at the time. Ronnie told her to leave, and she said he didn't want anything romantic from her at all because he had a girlfriend. She didn't leave until Ronnie's mum came home and threatened to call the police. A fun tidbit about this is that Ronnie had no neighbours for miles. He lived on farmland miles outside of the nearest city. Hell, he lived miles from me, and I was at least 10 minutes from the city. She had to have intentionally showed up, and she was obviously not popping in while in the area. Things seemed to calm down once I moved again. I had long since broken things off with Ronnie, and we remained friends for a good while. I heard less and less about Mandy, until I wondered if anything had even happened. It was finally seemingly over. About a year ago I was asked by Lena if I remembered Mandy, I told that I did, of course, and I asked why. She then dropped a bomb on me. Lena was a Christian for a while when I knew her. She'd been raised Baptist, and she and her siblings attended a youth group at the church that we had gone to, and I went with them to make them happy despite the fact I'm Jewish. We were all pretty close with the youth pastor and youth leaders, so I was surprised to hear that they'd stopped going weeks prior. You see, Mandy had been waiting every week at the youth group to see Marina, waiting to ask her out. Mandy, who was now 20 years old, was waiting on a weekly basis to see Marina, who was 12, to ask her on a date. A 20-year-old woman was trying desperately to ask out a 12-year-old girl who wasn't really old enough to know if she even liked anyone, let alone if she was gay or bisexual. I was beyond furious. I was seeing red, and messaged Mandy as she was still in my contacts. She became immediately defensive, asking me over and over who told her and why I wanted to know. Now for the past few years I've been studying abnormal psychological forensics and criminology to prepare for college and university when I go. This defensive behavior, especially in Mandy, showed me that she was guilty. I didn't answer past, someone told me and I need to know. Shockingly, she told me the truth, said it was true, but that she was done with it now and she had a boyfriend. This made me feel physically ill. I asked how old he was and she told me he was 16. The worst part about everything is, in my eyes, trying to ask out a 12-year-old girl when she was 20. That is the absolute most sickening thing about it all, and I feel ill just remembering this. Mandy, for your own sake, let's not meet. God only knows what I'd say or do to you if I ever did. When I was about 11 or 12, I went to an amusement park called King's Island with my sister, grandma, and mother. Since we knew the area well and had phones on us at the time, my mum and grandma would let my sister and I roam on our own to ride whatever we wanted. My sister and I just got done at the arcade, and as we left the arcade we made our way towards the Diamondback, which is a roller coaster. Before we got to the Diamondback, I told my sister we should go on the Zephyr, which is like a swing carnival ride. I was on the left side and my sister on the right. As we were in line, a man who looked to be 30 or 40 walked up to me. He put his hand on my lower back area and walked alongside me. As I gave him a dirty look, he immediately apologized and claimed he thought I was his girlfriend. Then he walked away like nothing had happened. I bawled my eyes out and immediately ran back to find my mum and grandma and explained what had occurred, and we decided to leave the park at that moment. While I was young at the time, I had heard enough stories about people taking other people to know that it could have ended a lot worse. Considering the fact that I was 11 while my sister was 9 and he was around 30 or 40, I remember thinking there were most likely no way he thought I was his girlfriend, or that my sister was anywhere close to his age. Maybe he did think I was his girlfriend and that it was an honest mistake, but either way it creeped me out a lot, as unlikely as that scenario is. Creeper at the amusement park? Let's not meet again. In 1988, I quit my job as a teacher in San Francisco and moved back with my parents in East Sacramento, in their guest house. It was a nice little cabin type with a small sitting area near the kitchenette, and the sound of shrubbery near my bedroom was relaxing. During the summer, I was taking a refresher course in alternative teaching methods in a nearby town called Rancho Cordova, and I was there for most hours of the morning from 9 till 12, and I would take the bus home. It was a really nice place to live, and the houses were beautiful. Who wouldn't want to live there? Not me. When I'd walk through Sacramento, I'd imagine walking through the busy streets of the Haight. I had to be there, so I had no other choice, and the teaching job I was doing to have at Folsom Middle School seemed promising. On a sunny afternoon, I walked home from the bus stop and noticed the neighbor's son, at only 10, was sitting on the parents' lawn. I asked him if he was okay, and he looked at me dazed. "There's a man looking in your window," he said. I thought maybe he'd seen my dad, and that was it. I asked him to carry my books while I unlocked the door, and told him it was probably my father. "No, he was looking from the outside," he said, once again thinking he was just a kid with an imagination. "What did he look like?" He said it was a man wearing a black mask like the Hamburglar. This was California, and David had never seen snow, so it's likely he'd never seen a ski mask, and it sounded like that was what he was describing. For a second I considered reporting it, but it was only the basis of a child who said a man who looked like the Hamburglar was looking in my parents' living room window. I let him inside, let him have a soda, and walked him across the street. The rest of the afternoon I sat on the patio of the guest house, smoking cigarettes and reading Stephen King. I lifted my head up to take a sip from my Coke when I saw a shadow duck behind the garden shed. It was almost like at the moment when Annie and Laurie are walking home in Halloween, and the shape hides behind the hedges. Almost like that. Cigarette in hand, I walk over to the garden shed slowly. "David, if that's you, go home." I looked behind and there was no one there, but beside it there were 2 footprints where someone wearing heavy boots was standing. I was freaked, but it could have easily been anybody, even the neighbor. I went inside and put on a record really loud, leaving the window open and sitting back on the patio reading my book. I thought if there was someone creeping about, maybe playing music would scare them to thinking someone was home. A knot was tightening in my stomach, and the more I thought about it, the more I was tempted to look up from my page to see if the shadow would jump out from behind the shed once more. I grew up there and never felt like East Sacramento was a place for prowlers. It seemed too much of a sunshine land for that. I blew the thought off and decided to pick the needle up, turn the stereo off, lock up, and go to an old friend's house until my parents returned home. I went to my cousin Cindy's house. She'd just married her boyfriend straight out of high school. Cindy was a kindred spirit and would go on to marry 4 more times by 1999 before she had her first son. "Call the police, that's what I'd do," she said, rinsing her hair in the sink. She just finished coloring it with food dye. Her husband, Brad, at the time, offered to go over there before he had to go to work at the video store. Brad wasn't butch or strong, but he pretended he was. I felt stupid. A grown-ass adult that was too scared to go home because the bogeyman was hiding in the garden shed. That place always gave me the creeps. It's dark. There's spiders. Cindy laughed. "But we never thought there was someone in there," I replied to her. I called my mother at her prayer group and she came to pick me up. I felt even more pathetic than I did before. I told her what I'd seen and what David said. She said that I was scaring myself and to not be silly. She laughed, and I thought perhaps she was right. That was until I came home to find the kitchenette window in the guest house had its screen taken off, put neatly against the wall. Nothing had been taken, but things had been moved. Odd things. Some records were pulled slightly off the shelf. A picture of an old friend had been placed face down, and there was an empty beer can in my trash can. I don't drink, and some of the food in my fridge had been eaten. My degree was now on a different hook. Either some jackass broke into my house to move some stuff and have lunch, or I was going crazy. After this, I started getting obscene phone calls like heavy breathing and whispers that I couldn't understand. I asked the police what to do, and they told me to put in new locks on the doors and call my phone company to change my number. When I asked them if there was something they could do, they said they couldn't because I had no evidence these things were related and nothing was stolen. I prepared to move and decided I wasn't going to wait around to be the victim of crime. One afternoon I'd come home from work to hear the phone ringing. I dropped my student's work on the outside chair and quickly unlocked the door, picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" There was nothing. "Hello, anybody there?" They were calling me a whore in this high-pitched whisper. I'd had enough. I moved that weekend in with my cousin Cindy until I could find somewhere else. My parents never experienced the phone calls and never found their things misplaced. For some time I considered it was a student I gave a bad grade, or someone following me home. I'd like to know who it was. It'll eat me alive otherwise. I've gone on long enough without knowing, and maybe I will never know. When I was 12, we went to Disneyland. We decided to go to the Animal Kingdom, my favorite, because of the exotic animals and all the rides. We had an amazing day doing all the rides, and it was an awesome time, but it started towards the end. I saw the same two men, but thought nothing of it. We started queuing up for some water parade, and as we were queuing it began to rain. It was classic Florida rain, and there was no sign of it clearing, so they cancelled the play. We wanted to see if the rain would dissipate, but after 5 minutes my dad left, but I elected to stay longer. They were adamant on leaving, so we were on our way out and were taking 3 steps when my mother screamed, not a scream of fear, but a scream of pain and sorrow. I turned around. "Lucas!" she screamed, half crying, half furious, as we asked everyone if we'd seen him. I never really got on with my brother, but when he disappeared, you think you might never see him again. It's a horrible feeling, like all happiness has disappeared and will never return. I told my mum I was going to do laps around the park, and that we were going to look for him. After my desperate screams, I saw him. He was with the guy I'd seen twice before. I ran to him and my adrenaline kicked in. I raised my fist and hit him clean in the jaw. He let go of my brother and put his hands on his jaw, and I picked my brother and ran off with him. I'm so thankful the guy who got him didn't manage to escape, and I hope we never meet again, you creep. I've had more than my fair share of creepy encounters, but this one was particularly dramatic. One where I really did feel my life was in danger. I was on holiday visiting family in South Asia. Having been born and brought up in England, a lot of things over there are quite foreign to me. We, my parents and I, were staying at my uncle's apartment. My aunt and uncle were at work, and my parents had gone away for a day trip to visit relatives in a neighboring town, leaving me at home with my 2 cousins, Hamish and Adam. Adam was 8 years old at the time, and Hamish was 3, and I was about 13. Adam and Hamish always argued about everything. If one wanted a particular cereal for breakfast, an argument would break out over breakfast choices. Adam is stupid for wanting Cocoa Pops. My Shreddies are so much better. I'm not even going to sit here and eat while he eats. Anyway, that sort of stuff. While playing with a toy, let's make the doll swim in the lake. No, it's not a lake, it's the sea. And so on and so forth. I was very used to them disagreeing and squabbling, and couldn't remember any time when they were in harmony, especially over playtime. This might seem like a digression, but it's relevant to this story. On this particular day, Hamish was in the living room, building a Lego boat he had been working on for a few days now. Adam had gone outside to play with his friends on the street. He'd left the door slightly ajar so that he could come and go. It was a hot and humid day as usual, so I went to take a shower and was sitting in my room drying my hair, when Hamish came running in tears. "Tashina, my boat, it's broken." "What?" "My Lego boat, someone stepped on it and broke it." "Oh." He grasped my hand and led me to the living room where the boat was snapped. He was upset. It had been his pride and joy, and so I commiserated and reassured him that not all hope was lost and that it shouldn't take too long to fix. I thought he must have broken it himself by accident, perhaps stepping on it and not realizing he had been working on the floor with the boat sitting in the living room rug. With Hamish finally placated and back to work on his boat, I returned to my room, and a few minutes passed without incident. I could hear Hamish moving around, and I heard Adam come back inside and go to the living room. I got a book and curled up on the bed. It was a lazy, drowsy sort of day. And then all of it was shattered. Adam and Hamish came charging into my room and was tripping over each other, screaming my name. Hamish ran to me, and Adam paused to slam on the bedroom door to close it behind him. "There's a man in our living room. He's wearing a mask, and he had a knife. He must have been the one who broke my boat." "Wait, what?" I look at the pair of ashen faces, completely solemn. "Are you playing some sort of game?" "No, he's wearing a horrible, scary mask, and he has a knife." If they were play acting, and if this was some sort of pretend game. "Where is he?" "In the living room," Adam said, pointing. "He's wearing a mask?" "Yes, like a Halloween mask with a big scary smile on it." "Smile showing teeth," said Hamish, nodding along furiously. "And a knife," said Adam. "A big knife," said Hamish. They looked entirely serious and terrified, looking at me with their upturned, earnest and pleading faces. I think more than anything, it was the fact that they agreed upon the description of this man and what he was carrying that really cemented upon me that they were telling the truth. If this had been some sort of pretend game, they would have disagreed by now, trying to outdo each other in what he was wearing, or perhaps the weapon he was carrying. Instinctively, I went to the door. I wasn't sure why, or to achieve what purpose. I still wasn't scared. I knew they were telling the truth. But could there be an innocent explanation? They were overexcitable kids. My hand went to the door handle. "No," said Adam in a hiss, as they both came running towards me, their hands clawing at me. "Don't go there." "Wait. Okay, let me get this straight. He was in the living room." They nodded. "What was he doing? How did you manage to escape? Did he threaten you?" "I was sitting on the sofa watching TV," said Adam. "Hamish was on the floor with his boat. The man came in and we saw the knife." "What happened then? Was he pointing it at you?" "No, it was just in his hand. As soon as we saw him, we ran and came to you." The living room has 2 doors. One that leads to a corridor that basically snakes around the front of the building, and the other one that leads to a corridor to the inside of the apartment. The boys had taken this latter doorway with a man presumably standing by the first one. This story did indeed make sense. It had come so suddenly and was taking me a while to actually process the seriousness of what they were telling me, that there was an intruder inside the apartment with a knife, and I was the oldest, so I was in charge. They had to come to me for protection. Oh God, what to do? Okay, let's not panic. We need to call the cops. Mobiles were still uncommon in this era. The only phone in the apartment was the landline, and luckily it was right outside my room. It was on the table in the corridor facing the door to my room. However, it wasn't a cordless phone, so if the cord was long enough, I might be able to grab the whole thing and pull it inside and close the door. I rehearsed it in my mind. I need to get the phone so we can call the police. No, the man will get you, said Hamish, clinging at my arm. He might be in the corridor, said Adam. We were all slightly whispering. Well, we can check, I said, my hand going for the handle. No, hissed Adam, as he grabbed my hand, insisting it was dangerous. And I told them I'd just take a peek. Adam, eventually, and reluctantly agreed. I turned the handle slowly, and my stomach felt tight as I did so. The tension of the boys standing next to me didn't help the matters. When it was slightly ajar, I pressed my face into the gap and looked around. The corridor was dark and empty. Okay, I said, turning to face the boys. There's no one there. I'm going to sneak out and grab the phone and come back, okay? As soon as I get back in with the phone, you close the door behind me. It's only a few steps to the phone. It'll just take a few seconds, don't worry. Adam was a mess, wringing his hands, pleading with me not to go. Hamish stood stoic, nodding, and I pulled the door open further and stepped out. Hamish and Adam crowded into the space I had just vacated, peering out the doorway to watch me. As I stepped outside into the empty, quiet corridor, I began to feel silly. Could this just be the boys' active imagination? Had they seen something on TV and become convinced it was real? Maybe I was just being stupid. Maybe there was no one there, and I was feeling much calmer and incredulous about the whole situation. Still, it was possible, but better to be safe than sorry. I would take the phone inside and call my uncle to come home. I stepped up to the table, took the phone, quickly assessing it, and tugged on the cord that plugged it into the wall. Yes, it should be long enough to take inside. I picked the whole thing up and looked up. He was standing there wearing a clown-like grinning mask, knife in hand. I don't think I need to tell you it was the most stomach-dropping, terrifying moment. The shock and fright felt like something had just smacked me in the face. I couldn't scream. I dropped the phone and just leapt back to the door, slamming it into Adam and Hamish as I did so. All three of us banged the door shut. Adam and Hamish stood leaning against the door, and I dragged my bed in an adrenaline-fueled frenzy. There was no lock on the door. Would the bed be strong and heavy enough to hold it? I began piling everything I could onto the bed to make it even heavier. Adam and Hamish wordlessly joined in. The books on the bookshelf, all my bags, my suitcase, my clothes, the clock, everything. And then we all sat down on the bed, clambering onto it, leaning against the upper part of the door to make sure it wouldn't open. Now that we were all still, we could just look at each other. Adam began to cry. He was bawling in a thin, whiny voice. "Oh my God, we're gonna die," he wailed. No, we're not gonna die," I said, though my heart was still pounding painfully against my chest, and I felt like I was gonna be sick. Hamish was just sitting quietly next to me, his little hands folded across his chest. "We're gonna die," Adam said again. I told them to calm down. I thought about what we could do. We couldn't stay here forever. We could just wait until he leaves. I don't think I'll ever forget the image. Little Hamish, 3 years old, sitting next to me looking solemn, his legs out in front of him, clad in those little jeans, with his hands clasped in his lap, his back leaning against the door, and Adam on the other side of me, his knees pulled up to his chest, tears streaming down his face, making whimpering noises. All of us in a row barricaded against the door, and we could hear footsteps in the corridor occasionally. The time pressed on. but our tension didn't wane. With every passing second, we expected to hear a thud on the door, and the man trying to get in. Thankfully, it didn't happen. We eventually heard my aunt come in talking in the corridor, wondering where we were and calling us. It was amazing, but there was a tinge of dread in case the man was still in the apartment, in case he might attack her. Hastily running outside, we told her what happened and searched the place, emboldened by the presence of an adult, but there was no sight of the man. The frustrating thing was, though my uncle and aunt, when they got home from work, didn't believe us at all, she thought we were flat out lying for entertainment, which I found particularly undermining, given that at 12 years old, and mature enough for my age, I would never make something up as serious as that. First she laughed and rolled her eyes, waving us away when we persisted and repeated, insisting it did really happen and that we were telling the truth. She eventually grew tired and told us to stop. I still find it astonishing how lightly they can take the complaints of children. We were shaken up for the rest of the day and feeling very indignant at having been just shooed away after something so terrifying had happened. When my parents got back, we told them, and it was some solace that they did indeed take us seriously. They knew that it was completely out of character for me to dream up or lie about something like that. My aunt and uncle, however, still didn't agree. Later in the evening, after we were getting ready to go out to dinner, we heard my aunt cry out in surprise, and my uncle rushed to see what happened. It turns out all of her jewellery was gone, and that was when they finally did indeed believe that we had been telling the truth, and there was an intruder. One night in November of 2017, I was 22 years old. My mum and I went grocery shopping. While standing in the bakery section, my mum and I ran into my aunt, and the three of us stood there and chit-chatted for a while. I'd been feeling generally uneasy around this time because I had recently been binge-watching a lot of YouTube videos about true crime and creepy encounters. I was having trouble sleeping, as I had been getting scared when I was home alone, and heard the tiniest noise. Due to this unease or paranoia, I was very alert and on edge in the bakery at the grocery store. I stood with my back to the bagels and kept an eye on everyone walking past us as my mum and aunt shared stories. Nobody seemed suspicious until I caught the sight of a prematurely balding man. He looked like your average mid-30s, brawny neckbeard nice guy. I remember thinking to myself, God, he's kind of creepy looking, isn't he? As he walked through the produce section in the bakery. But then I started to feel bad. Chill out, you're being way too judgmental, I told myself, going so far as to even smile to him out of sheer guilt. He's probably staring at you because you're staring at him. He's just glancing his way by. He's gonna forget about you the second he takes his eye off you. Right? Wrong. I completely forgot about this experience for just a few blissful, ignorant months. Then in January, I received a messenger request from an old friend I'd lost touch with. My long-lost friend was the first of many to reach out, saying there was a lot of buzz on Facebook about a local sex offender who had been taking pictures of young women with hair he deemed pretty, some in their 20s like me, some well below the age of 18, and posting them on a picture-sharing site. I don't know exactly how, but his online albums were stocked with, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of these pictures. He had been found out, and a bunch of screenshots were being plastered all over Facebook to raise awareness. My old friend saw a few pictures of me standing against the bagels flanked by my mother and aunt, my long hair hanging down in post-French braid waves. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw the screenshots. I told my family about what I just found out, and my brother immediately called the police to report it. As he was talking to an officer, I received more screenshots, this type of the creep's registry page. He was the man from the grocery store. The man I was initially unnerved by. The man I felt guilty about. The man that I smiled at. When my brother got off the phone with the police, he told us that they had been flooded with reports all night. While sympathetic, the policeman my brother spoke to said there was nothing they could do, as the creep was legally within his rights to take those pictures of us out in public. The man was allegedly assaulted outside of a convenience store the night his pictures were discovered, before he even realized he had been exposed, and he has since been arrested for possession of indecent images of children in an unrelated case. Fun fact, my brother had actually been aware of this guy long before, as he was apparently infamous on the net for being a sketchy white dude who was obsessed with Asian women, had a hair fetish, and oh yes, was a convicted offender. So as they say, creepy photographer, let's not meet. For the past number of years, I have been working in a moderately sized amusement park in the middle of the city. I am at the admissions desk, meaning that the work is quite administrative, answering the phones, responding to emails, and admitting customers into the park. Being in the middle of the city, you do meet a lot of interesting characters, from old locals to traveling tourists. For the most part, I do enjoy the work that's involved, but every so often you speak to a customer or receive a complaint which really doesn't do much for your staff morale. Yet, I do always try my hardest to keep positives. Over the years, I've seen plenty of people stand in front of me at the front desk. There have been drunks, stoners, happy and sad people, angry parents, and an abundance of complaints to top it all off. But in that time until last week, a customer had never angrily threatened me personally before. So for some context about how this conflict began, the specific amusement park which I work in has a family loyalty system in that you can purchase a ticket which is valid for a set number of people to visit the park as many number of times as you'd like within 12 months. If they wished, they could come every single day of the year using this ticket. Now the only catch is that it's only valid for the people who are named on the ticket, as well as there being photographs on the ticket once it's scanned through, so that we can identify who the ticket is valid for when they arrive. Now some procedures are in place so that the tickets can't be misused, otherwise it could be passed around by neighbours and friends and family, and we'd essentially be letting people in for free. Basically, we say a group of 4 arrive to the park, and only 2 are named on the ticket. Only those 2 would be allowed in under that ticket. The other 2 would need to pay for their admission, obviously. Now if a ticket is given to an admission staff member, and no one present is named or photographed on the ticket, it would be retained by the staff and be sent back to the owners with a warning. If it happens a second time, said ticket will be cancelled. With this in mind, last week a family of 4 approached my till and handed me one of these loyalty tickets. Upon scanning the ticket, I noticed that none of the people in front of me were present or were photographed on the ticket. The biggest giveaway was the father of the family on the photograph was in his mid-30s, with cropped black hair. The man who was in front of me was in his early 60s with long grey locks. Seeing this, I asked the guests if the ticket was theirs, as there was a different family in the photo in front of me, to which they replied, yes. Our friends sold us the tickets before they moved to Poland. It's now ours. Now, selling or transferring these tickets is prohibited, especially without the notification of the amusement park beforehand. And 99 times out of 100, it was sold to us by our friends is the excuse used when the ticket is just being borrowed amongst friends. After hearing this and clarifying that no one there had been on the ticket originally, I informed the father that unfortunately I would not be able to use this ticket today, and their admission fee of $15 per person would need to be paid. The father asked for the ticket back, to which I told him I couldn't do. We would retain the ticket and it would be mailed back to the original owner by ourselves. When he heard this, the father's demeanor changed completely, and he held out his hand ordering me to return it. I don't usually do well in confrontations and try to avoid them when necessary, but the way he spoke to me rubbed me the wrong way, and I insisted that it was out of my ability to return the ticket. He once again ordered me to put the ticket in his hand, pointing to his hand with an increasing level of anger in his voice that sent chills down my spine. He even told me he would personally give it back to the owners himself, despite them having to move to Poland in his story. This continued back and forth for a minute or two, and realizing I wasn't going to get anywhere by arguing with this man, I placed the ticket behind the counter and was looking for a loyalty ticket application form to show him where it states the consequences of misusing the ticket. As I was pulling out the form, the man lunged over the counter to grab the ticket. When I swiped the ticket onto the floor out of his reach, he then lunged for me, but couldn't reach. That's when I lost all patience with the man, raised my voice and told him he couldn't do that. I picked up the ticket and informed him I was taking it into the back office for it to be cancelled. At this stage, a security guard approached and told me to find a supervisor to speak to the man. I went into the back office to tell the supervisor what happened, and they took the ticket and came back onto the floor with me. The man was now in a heated argument with security over how I had stolen the card which he had brought originally. My supervisor checked the ticket once more, confirmed that it was being misused, and told the man once again that the ticket was going to be cancelled. He proceeded to argue with her, growing more and more frustrated and changing his story from before. Apparently, he was now the original owner of the ticket, and he didn't know who the family in the photo were. It was clear that if his family hadn't been there, he would have picked a fight with her, the security guard, or perhaps even myself, as he was starting to escalate into hysteria. After some time, he calmed down enough to throw $100 at me and pay the $60 fee for his family. As I was handling his change, he leaned in close and said softly, "Remember, the world is a small place. I will see you on the street one night, and you will wish you never met me." He left, and I continued to serve 2 or more customers in somewhat of a daze. Before the park manager came over to my till and invited me into the office to explain what happened. After I explained the incident to the manager and told him what the man had said to me in the end, the manager called for a number of security guards to remove him from the park, and this was achieved in under 30 minutes. What has been described to me as violent oppression. I don't know how he was removed, I wasn't there to see it, but his family was allowed to stay. The rest of the day went on without incident. The park opens at 8 PM usually, yet if it's particularly quiet upon closing time, some of the admission staff are allowed to leave early, while the guests exit the park. On this day I was relieved at 7:30. I don't have a car, but luckily my sister was on her way home from work and stopped to collect me. I waited in the office until her arrival, chatting with the supervisors and making light-hearted talk about what had happened during the day until my sister texted me, letting me know she was right outside the admissions building. On my way out, I was scanning the car park, and on my way over, I saw the man from earlier, with greasy grey hair sitting in his car, staring right at me and watching me approach. For a split second I thought that this was the moment of reckoning he had told me about, before realizing that he was probably just waiting for his family to come out of the park, since he hadn't left his car to teach me a lesson yet. Despite this, he never took his eyes off me as I passed his car, and looked at me with nothing but pure hatred. I've genuinely never seen someone look at me that way before, and it half terrified me. A week after or so passed, and I didn't run into the man since. No phone calls or emails from him either, so I'm now in the clear. Either way, angry guy who threatened me at my work, I know the world is a small place, but please, let's not meet again. When I was still in high school, I was crossing a bridge to go to school, and this very friendly man stopped me and asked me to fill up a survey about budgeting. I was like, okay, sure, and when I was done, he told me to fill out my contact details and gave reasons, like how he's a social worker, and of course I gave him my number. I was so dumb, but at the very least I was smart enough to give him a fake name. In 2016, I began to receive random messages from this guy and was getting super creeped out by it. He knew which school I went to because I was wearing my uniform then, and was starting to ask personal questions. I tried to avoid them all and generally didn't reply to him, but he kept texting me, albeit infrequently, maybe a message a day. And when he wished me a happy Valentine's Day, I decided enough was enough and blocked him, as I wasn't feeling safe at all. Later that year, we received a police notice calling for witnesses because they arrested a few perverts in the area I was schooling in, as there were multiple girls' secondary schools and tertiary education institutions in that area. In the notice there were several photos, and I saw the very same man, the man who approached me to fill out that survey. I was disgusted. Turns out he would use this survey as a tactic and try to approach female teenagers and take photos with them and harass them with texts later. I was shocked as well. My school was in a reputable neighborhood, and we all assumed that there wouldn't be such creeps, but goodness were we all wrong. I was glad he was caught by the police. To the photo-taking creep, let's not meet again. But I did. After he was arrested, I graduated and started schooling in a tertiary institution in 2017. It's about an hour's drive away from where my secondary school was, and I also moved to the school dormitories nearby. As I was walking home one day, I caught sight of him lurking at a bus stop nearby. Oh boy, I could never forget his face. He looked even more creepy carrying a black bag, holding some papers that looked eerily like survey forms while holding a very old camera phone. How did I ever miss that camera phone when I encountered him last time? I was very scared. How could he be here? Wasn't he arrested last year? Wasn't he stalking me the whole time? I was almost crying and quickly called a friend and walked past him. Once he was out of sight, I ran home while on the phone. I was telling all of my schoolmates to be careful, and soon enough the school was informed. The discipline master and a few PE teachers went to apprehend the stalker, and sometime later dragged him into the school office and contacted authorities. I was informed that he was released last year because of insufficient evidence. Apparently in the place where I lived, taking photos of girls/women was not a crime. They searched his flat, and there wasn't anything incriminating other than a creepy ton of photos of female students. After this incident, he disappeared, only to be stalking other girls in another school. How I wished we would never meet again, but I still saw him roaming near my school dorm every now and then, trying to be discreet with his little camera phone. I'm moving to university soon, and would be pretty far away from him. However, I'm not sure if I will ever be free of this stalker. All that I know is that I never want him to meet again. Also, as a final note, I went to check the news and he did get arrested. The news was dated March 2019 because they'd gotten new reports in 2017. So yeah, the 1.5 year processing time is just super long, but I'm glad now there will be justice for this creep. This happened to me when I was about 14. I was best friends with this girl called Robin. We've long since parted ways, but I used to stay over at hers all the time. Robin was an only child to an older couple, both roughly about 60. Her house was old, and the bedrooms were quite small. She had a thing for decorating her room in spooky things. It was overcrowded with trinkets and clothes, which looked really cool. But it meant that after we were done watching trashy 90s anime, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I could go to sleep in this spare room, or I would risk suffocating under a pile of gothic teddy bears and Pokemon on her floor. One evening her parents went out to the local pub just down the street with some old friends, so I stayed over. It was great, free house for just the two of us, and they made sure we had all the junk food we could want. They were really sweet and always made sure we felt safe before leaving. I should also mention that they never brought guests home, especially when their daughter had a friend over. For the most part, I had a great night. When it was time to go to sleep, I went into what I call my room because I was there so often. It was small and just fit a wardrobe, dresser and double bed, which, considering how I had a single bed and shared a room with my sister, it was a luxury. We would usually spend hours sending each other DS PictoChat messages until one of us fell asleep. I curled up into bed and passed out pretty quickly. Sometime at 4 a.m, I awoke to someone fidgeting at the door handle. At first I was a bit confused, as Robin would almost always message me through PictoChat if she was going to come into my room. The door was rattling at this stage, and I was a bit freaked. It lasted a few minutes. The rattling subsided, and I rolled over and tried to calm myself down, thinking it might have been her dad or mum making sure the door was closed. I don't know. I was confused. I'm not sure at this point if I fell asleep or what, but I didn't hear anyone entering the room, and then I heard this splashing sound. I remember thinking it was really loud and clear, and as the seconds went by I realized this wasn't part of the dream or something. I was actually hearing it. So as I was facing the wall, I rolled my head around as silently as I could, and I could see this very tall man next to my bed facing the corner. He was so close to me. He was at least 6'3" tall, had thick black short hair, and was incredibly pale and toned. He looked to be in his early 30s, and he was wearing nothing but a pair of black boxer shorts. There was no way this could have been her dad. While he was almost as tall as this guy, her dad was visibly older, had silver hair, and the top of his head was bald. There was no way anyone could confuse him with this guy. I was in shock. I had no idea what was happening, and I remember feeling my heart in my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I just stared in shock for a few seconds, and then as quietly as I could, I turned back around and pretended to be asleep. I remember trying to control my breathing so he wouldn't notice. Eventually he left, and I was aware for what felt like an hour, too afraid to move. I don't know who this guy was, and if he was still outside my door. Did he see me? If he saw me, what would he do? I didn't hear anyone else in the house, and there was no talking, and the walls of the house were paper thin. When I eventually worked up the nerve, I darted into Robin's room and broke down. I was panicking, and she was laughing at me, saying I was being ridiculous, and that I was lying, that I was just having a nightmare. She told me to go back to bed, and I refused. I didn't feel safe. She rolled her eyes, and we both went into the room. She looked around and suddenly started shrieking. She had just stepped into a puddle of piss. I told you. It was everywhere. It was on the wardrobe, on the dresser, and soaked into the carpet. At this point, she was just as confused as I was. Even so, it was 5 a.m., so she grabbed my pillow and blanket from my room, and I gladly took my chance with the teddy avalanche and slept on her floor. The next morning, I remember being incredibly wary of her dad. There were no other male figures around, and they weren't the kind of people to have guests over, especially when their daughter had guests over. So, I directed my fear and confusion at him. I knew it wasn't him though, but at that point I was just so anxious around any kind of male figure. I remember sitting around the breakfast table and Robin was still not sure what to make of it. Somehow part of her didn't want to believe me, even when she saw the evidence for herself. I didn't say anything to her parents, neither did she. I went home scared and confused out of my mind, and out of my friends and family, no one seemed to believe me. It wasn't until recently that I retold the story to a group of friends, and my best friend, who I was friends with at the time, reacted with, "Wait, that was real? We all thought you were just making that up." Later on, my sister told me that the houses in the area were connected through the attics, and you can get from one house to the other. Maybe someone crawled through there and had gotten in. But why were they almost naked? Why did they know I was there? I never really understood what happened. Needless to say, I never slept in that room and never slept alone in that house again. I was in about 5th grade. My mum and I loved to go to Disneyland. We lived about an hour's drive away and held annual passes. One of my mum's favourite rides was the Tower of Terror, which I was very much afraid of because of the drops. Right in front of the ride is a little area for the fast passes. For anyone who's unfamiliar, they're small machines that you can get passes from to skip the line, but you'd have to do a whole different line. This is where I would wait for my mum and went on the ride. There was always a worker there, plus many others in viewing distance, and I had one of those flip phones in case I got lost. As I'm sitting there, I hear a worker behind me talking to a man, asking him to move out from the fast pass area since they were closing them off for the day. The man walked out and sat down next to me. He was about 18 to 20. He asked beforehand if I wouldn't mind if he sat next to me, and I said no since I didn't think anything of it, and there was plenty of space in between us. Now I'm a very friendly kid, and naturally I was going to start a conversation with him while I waited. When I turned, he was already looking at me. He stuck out his hand offering to shake hands with me, and gave me his name, which he said was Light. Now that I'm older and have watched Death Note, I'm sure it was a reference to the show. Anyway, I introduced myself to him, and we start to talk. As the conversation went on, he scooted closer to me. I didn't think anything of it because we were pretty far apart, and I figured he just wanted to be able to hear me better. It was a relatively normal conversation, asking where I was from, hobbies, and how old I was, until he asked, "Do you have a phone? What's your phone number?" Luckily, I had my phone in my bag, so I just said I was too young for one, and he followed up with this question: "Are you ticklish?" Remember, I'm a tiny 5th grade girl, and he had just told me he was 19. I froze and felt all the adrenaline rushing into my body as he proceeded to grab and squeeze very high on my thigh and the sides of my stomach. That lasted for 5 seconds until I saw my mum, which prompted me to get up and run to her. As I walked up though, she looked really annoyed. She was looking past me, and behind me I hear, "Hi, I'm Light." He shook my mum's hand. "I was wondering if I could spend the rest of the day with you guys." My mum said, "No," and he walked away. I began bawling my eyes out to her. She explained the reason she looked so angry is because when I was a little kid, I used to invite people over to our house or to hang out with us, so she had assumed I had done it again. I didn't tell her about him touching until I began high school, which I definitely should have. But for some reason, I had this idea in my head that I would be in trouble if I told her. So creepy, Disneyland man, let's never meet again. I worked the night shift at a gas station, and it was in a neighborhood that was directly across the street from an assisted housing complex for Section 8 people. So there were a lot of mentally ill people that had schizophrenia and drug problems. About 4 months into the job, I started hearing blood-curdling screams from a man yelling for something and about someone to get away and cursing a lot. Bear in mind this is all on the night shift. Then I saw him. From outside the window I saw a middle-aged man, overweight, with a scruffy beard. He was African American. Not that that has anything to do with his actions, but just so that you get a picture for this guy. He was missing teeth, and he'd be screaming at all hours of the night, and we closed for a few hours between 3 and 5 a.m. to clean, and he'd come into the store at 2:50 on the dot, right before I was allowed to close the doors. He would mumble to himself and say things like, "Nah, we don't need that," and, "Well, we don't have enough money." I just thought he was nuts. He would also ask how much everything was, even though he was standing right next to the price tags of stuff, and it was very annoying. This kind of stuff continued for 6 months straight. A lot of the time during this happened, there would be others that came in at the same time as he, in order to get alcohol, and they lived in the housing complex, because they all knew the screaming guy. I guess he was hot topic in the apartments. Anyway, one night this screaming guy leaves, and a different guy that's also in the store comes up to me and tells me to not let him into the store anymore, because he's got bad juju. I'm a pretty level-headed guy and skeptical, but what this guy told me creeped me out. He said he's positive the screaming guy lives alone in his apartment, and he was invited into his place once because he was less crazy at that point and then got worse. The dude tells me that when he was in Crazy Guy's apartment, that he would feel like someone would pop out at any moment, and that he felt like he was being watched, and it felt like a very negative place to be in. The day gets later, and the normal dude decides to leave, and when he left Crazy's place, he looked in his apartment window from the outside and saw multiple shadows that looked like human shapes walking past the shades of the windows. He said he went back one more time to hang out, but never did again when the Crazy started saying that they're stealing his thoughts and memories. So I hear the stories and am now like, wow, that's nuts. And the normal guy just says that he's not trying to freak me out, but that it's just better to be far away because trouble follows him. So one day the Crazy guy comes back at midnight, same time as always, and I tell him he's not allowed in the store anymore, and he begins to walk around the store and ask how much everything is, and I'm begging him to leave at this point, and he gets mad at me and says he's not going to leave until he can bag a buy of Cheetos. So I sell them to him, and it's around 3:03 a.m. at this point, and he picks up the chips and says, "They see you now. They don't like you," and then walks out and literally starts screaming at the top of his lungs in the parking lot. I locked those doors so fast it was insane. A few weeks pass and I barely saw him, but he always said, "They see you," when he'd come in. One day I worked a mid-shift and got off at 11:30 p.m. I clocked out and started walking down the street to my house, and I see the Crazy guy sitting on a chair on the second story of the apartment complex, outside what I assume is his apartment. And I see him in the chair, and then I look at his window, and the curtains are closed, but I saw 3 human-shaped silhouettes like solid shadows right up against the window, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I remembered the story the guy told me. I ran home so fast, I thought I was going to break the sound barrier. This happened years ago, but still affects me to this day. The summer after I graduated high school, I was still living at home. I was up late one night and was packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was unbelievably hot, and I had the window open as I sat and folded clothes. It was around 2 a.m., and the next thing I knew, there was a hand coming through the gap in the screen of my window. I screamed, and the hand flew back out. I was stunned, but there was a part of me that wondered if it was just my younger brother pranking me. I got up and looked out the window, and just saw the figure of a man staring back at me. I ran into my brother's room, and he was there playing video games. We called the police, who came and searched the area. They found nothing, warned me and my parents to lock the windows and doors, and left. We were all still shaken up, and my mum had a feeling that he would come back. It turns out her mother's intuition was right. She went outside and waited on our back porch. After 20 minutes or so, she saw a man dressed in black who slinked into our backyard along the tree line, as unfortunately there wasn't a fence on that side. He hid behind a tree for a few seconds and ran to another tree and hid there, slowly working his way towards my window. My mother yelled something to him, and he took off running. The police returned, but couldn't find a trace of him. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains. My parents installed some motion detecting lights, and that seemed to be the end of that. About 6 months later, my friend and I got an apartment downtown together. We were really excited, as this was our first place on our own. The apartment wasn't exactly the best quality, but it was so fun to be living in the city. The downside was that it was street parking only. After a few weeks, my car was broken into. Nothing was taken, but a single rose sat on the passenger seat. It was creepy, but I vowed to be vigilant and safe. I always tried to park close to the entrance near the lights, but often it was difficult to get those spots, and I would often have to park further away on darker streets. Things quickly began escalating at this point. My car was broken into at least once a week. Most of the time, a flower was left, which I always threw on the ground. But once, a pair of men's underwear was left. And even more creepily, there was an occasion where a bag of Tootsie Rolls, as they were my favorite candy, were left as well. This made me wonder if the person knew me personally, and I started to become suspicious of everyone. There was a laundry in the basement of the apartment, and one day I went down to get a load that finished drying. As I started to fold, I realized all of my undergarments, bras and panties were gone. Another week, I had a male friend over from school, and his tires got slashed during the visit. By the time the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move elsewhere. The letter described a love for me that had been going on for years. He noted things that proved he had been watching me closely. I was able to arrange for another friend to take over my lease, and I moved in with another friend on the other side of the city. It was a secured building and had an underground parking garage that was only accessible to tenants. I felt much more secure, and the extra money spent was well worth the peace of mind. Things were quiet for a few months, and then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were wary of Ashley's new boyfriend from the beginning. For one, they met on MySpace after he reached out to her. Another reason was that the new boyfriend, Matt, was extremely good looking. And while Ashley was a wonderful person, she wasn't the type you would typically expect someone like him to date. Ashley was thrilled. She'd never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I, however, thought he was weird and creepy from the beginning. Matt was on the quiet side and always seemed to be sporting an uncomfortable, leering smile. It was difficult to carry on any sort of a conversation with him because he would always make it weird with some random facts that were completely unrelated to what we were talking about. I had deleted my MySpace when the initial stalking began, but I created a dummy account to learn more about Matt. It didn't look like he really knew any of his friends in real life. They were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information was vague. My friends and I gently tried to discourage her from seeing Matt. He technically hadn't done anything wrong, but he was just so strange. She would immediately get defensive and would shut the conversation down, and Matt started to spend more time at the apartment, and I found myself finding any excuse I could to avoid coming home. One day I came home from work and found Matt on my couch alone drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work and she told him he could stay to just hang out. I was furious because I didn't want to spend any time with him, so I grabbed a beer and a snack and headed off to my room and shut the door. About 30 minutes or so later, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch some TV and get to know each other better because we both loved Ashley. I didn't want to, but decided that perhaps I ought to give it a try. He put on a movie and I tried to just focus on that because I didn't want to talk. At one point, I glanced over to Matt and he was staring at me with a smile on his face. "What?" I snapped at him, and he just continued smiling and said, "I just can't believe it." "Believe what?" I asked him. He said nothing and went back to watching the movie, still smiling. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the interaction had every hair standing on my body. I excused myself, went to my room, and locked the door. Another month or so went by, and I had managed to avoid being home for as much as possible, anything beyond sleep and showering. Matt practically lived there and had even brought a bunch of his things into Ashley's room. I really didn't want to move again, but was beginning to look for other options. On their 6-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table and an already opened card propped up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave when I decided to see what the weirdo had wrote to her. When I opened the card, my heart started beating through my chest. Without even reading the words he wrote, I was shaking. The handwriting was exactly the same as the one my stalker had sent. I had kept them as evidence and dug them out of my desk for comparison. The handwriting was unique and identical. Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. As they were on their way, I called Ashley and asked her to come over. She was at work, but said that she would be there when she could. I was terrified to tell her because I knew she would be shattered. The police took a statement from me and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they ended up breaking the news. Apparently, Ashley called Matt and left a furious message, even though the cops told her not to say anything, and he completely disappeared after that. There was no Matt or anyone matching his resemblance at the place he said he had worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment because he said he had been staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived out of state, and she had never met a friend of his because he said they had a falling out, because he was choosing to spend so much time with Ashley. It was all lies, and in the end, she was dating a stranger. We don't even know if Matt was his real name. The cherry on top of this whole thing was when we went through Matt's things. He had left everything when he disappeared, and Ashley and I decided to go through everything. There was a duffel bag that was full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments, there were about 10 pictures of me, all taken from far away, with the exception of one of me sleeping. The sheets were current, so I knew it had been at my current apartment before I started locking my bedroom door. A few pictures dated back to before the incident at my parents' house, which made us link that it was him as well. 2 pairs of my missing underwear were there, and I shudder to think of what he did with the rest. A Starbucks lid with red lipstick, a necklace I hadn't even noticed missing, and a few other random sick souvenirs. The police never tracked him down. I decided to accept an opportunity overseas that I had been considering and got the hell out of there. Unfortunately, Ashley and I quickly drifted apart. She had a really hard time accepting that her first love was a complete psycho. I think I had some underlying anger, maybe misplaced, for believing all of his lies and letting him get into our lives. I don't know what his endgame was. Would he have tried to hurt me? Or was he simply content with being in my world? I will never know. Being stalked changes you. Even when I lived across the world, I looked over my shoulder everywhere I went. I still have no social media accounts attached to my real name. I am married with children and know that he moved on to torment some other poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I tense up and keep a low profile. Part of me will always worry that Matt will resurface again. This happened when I was around 11 or 12 during the summer holidays. So, I was a 5-foot male out of shape and very shy. I was traveling with my parents in Europe, and we had been to Barcelona and Paris before that, and our next destination was Tarragona in Spain, where an amusement park called Puerto Aventura was located. We had scheduled to stay there in one of the hotels for 4 days to visit the park, water park, and beach club. What I am about to relate to you happened on the 3rd day in the main park. It was getting late, and most of the areas of the park were closed, except for the Mediterranean area, as a show with fountains, lights, and fireworks was being held over the lake that night. As it was the week of the park's anniversary, I asked my parents if we could stay to watch the show, but they were much too tired after an entire day of running around the amusement park and needed to go to the information desk to make sure the things that we had bought were properly sent to our hotel room. I begrudgingly obliged. As we were at the information center, I felt the need to go to the bathroom. I asked my mother if I could go and where the nearest one was. Turns out the closest one was at the edge of the Mediterranean area. My parents were busy at the info desk, and I have no siblings, so they told me to just go alone. I wish I had waited for them to be done, so I could have gone with my dad, because what transpired was pretty traumatizing. I navigated back to the Mediterranean area and to the bathrooms. The whole area was pretty busy, and lots of people were crowded by the edge of the lake to watch the show that was about to begin. I entered the bathroom and went on to do with my business until I noticed a man looking towards me. I normally don't like it when people stare at me, as I was shy, but this time instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt in danger. I glanced back at this 6-foot-tall man who was well built and in his 20s with very short hair, almost shaved, Caucasian and wearing a grey hoodie, dark jeans and black leather boots. It immediately struck me as the kind of person you wouldn't find in an amusement park. He was standing in front of the second urinal, as if using it, but I had the feeling he wasn't. I noticed him glance over at me a few times. I was done and eager to leave. I tried to pass behind him, and as I did, I noticed him reach for me. I barely avoided his hand as he grunted while I made a whimpering noise. The bathroom was very crowded, so no one noticed, and as I neared the exit, he left his urinal. I left the restrooms and looked over at the lake. The show had started. There were images being displayed on the water of the fountains with a projector, and loud music was blasting on all the speakers. I tried to blend into the crowd, hoping to lose him. After a minute of making my way through the cluster of people, I looked back, and not 10 meters behind me, there he was, following me through the same paths between the herd that had cut through. He now was wearing his hood up, covering his face, but I could feel him staring me down. I also noticed he was now wearing what I think were black, fingerless gloves. Alarms were going off in my head, as my previous stance on this situation went from weird and creepy to dangerous. I turned and started to desperately get to an area I could run in. About 15 seconds of squeezing through people, I reached the final stretch of the lakeside pathway. It was empty, too far from the main show for anyone to be there, yet the speakers were still playing loudly here. Ahead was a maintenance side path, with the gate slightly ajar, and to the left was a turn leading to the plaza, with the Info Central building. I ran as fast as my asthmatic, out-of-shape self could towards the turn. I could hear this man running behind me, his boots getting louder and louder behind me. He was gaining on me, and I started to panic. I even ran faster than I thought I could, but he was still getting closer. I had reached the turn and changed directions so fast I leaned towards the ground and nearly slipped. I felt motion beside me, as if someone had taken a swing at me, and I could hear a man complain in a language I couldn't recognize. My working theory is that it was Russian. I kept running through the plaza, directly to the information building, but I didn't hear the man running anymore. I turned and saw him slip into the service gate at the end of the street. I ran into the building, grabbed my mum's leg, stuttering and almost crying, but she was occupied with the lady at the counter, and though she saw me distressed, told me to go sit and wait, and tell her when we left. I protested, but she wouldn't listen, and was paying attention to the lady. As I walked over to sit on one of the chairs, I looked out the door and scanned the plaza with my eyes. I didn't notice anything at first, and almost looked away, but I saw something behind a direction sign next to a tree. In the most remote and dark corner of the plaza, it was the man. It felt like we made eye contact. I turned away and sat in the chair furthest from the entrance. When we were leaving, I looked over in the same direction again, and he wasn't there anymore. I told my parents, but since I had a vivid imagination as a kid, they chalked it up to me being paranoid because I was alone, and that, even if it were real, there were way too many witnesses for someone to try and pull something of the sort. I wasn't happy to be called a liar about this, but considering how thick-skulled my parents could be, I didn't insist. I had tried to forget this encounter, and was successful. But after running into the Let's Not Meet subreddit and hearing other similar stories, this resurfaced in my mind. Now I realize how bad this situation was, and that the people around me at the time were distracted by the show, and no one would have been wiser if I had have been taken. No one would have heard me scream or struggle, and the fact that the maintenance gate was open and I saw the man enter it means I almost ran right to where he wanted me to go. To think I was almost taken right next to a crowd of people boggles my mind, and I've never gone alone anywhere in an amusement park since. For context, I am a shy 19-year-old girl who doesn't tend to go outside very often, other than when I walk my 2 dogs, walk to college, or go to the store. I walk my dogs in a small, almost triangle-shaped area with a small, slightly overgrown pathway, which was only used by myself and a couple of other dog owners on my street. The left side of the triangle is formed from a line with trees with an old metal fence behind it. One part of the fence was broken and had a large gap in it, which led into a much larger field that was used for football practice and friendly games. The right wall of the triangle was created from wild bushes and shrubs, many of which were jagged and extremely overgrown. The bottom of the triangle is formed of an overgrown thick hedge. The pathway is in the center of this hedge. One night around the start of October, I was walking my dogs in the area, and something felt wrong. I felt like I was being watched. I ignored this feeling and told myself I was just being paranoid. My dogs were doing their thing when I heard leaves crunching from behind the trees. My dogs immediately turned to face the trees and began growling. I had never seen them react this way before, and the crunching sounded too slow for it to be a squirrel. I couldn't see anything since it was late, and there's no light in the area, but I bailed and pulled my dogs back and quickly headed home, still feeling like I was being watched, until I made it to my house and locked the door. The following few weeks were similar. Every night when I would walk the dogs in the area, I felt like I was being watched, despite not being able to see anyone there. On a couple of occasions, my small dog would stop what she was doing and stare at the trees and growl. My big dog would also refuse to enter the area on these nights. I put the feeling of being watched down to paranoia and guessed my dogs were just being weird. The week before Halloween, I was walking my dogs, but instead of feeling like I was being watched, I felt something different. I felt fear. I ignored the feeling and walked up the pathway. Both my dogs refused to follow until I had reached the end of the path. Then they both ran to me and started barking as they faced the area where the hole in the fence was. Like I said, the area is dark and overgrown, so it is hard to see. However, I swear that I saw the outline of someone crouching half hidden behind the tree that was next to the hole in the fence. I didn't stick around long enough to investigate. I pulled the dogs back and left as fast as I could. I looked behind me as I was leaving and saw that the hedge was moving. Nope. I ran, and my dogs did their best to keep up with me until we got back inside. I decided that from then on, I would just walk my dogs elsewhere, which I did, and the feelings of being watched at night and my dog's weird behavior subsided. Then Halloween arrived. I had decided to do some Halloween baking and made a batch of cupcakes. I went to decorate them. and discovered I was out of icing bags, so I walked to the store. This is only a 15-minute walk on foot, so it didn't take long to get there. I buy the icing bags and a few other things, then begin to walk home. My street is like a side street that leads off on a long straight road, so I have to walk down this road to get to my street. As I was walking down the long road, a guy in a black car that was already parked on the road stopped me. "I'm looking for a friend who lives in area, but I don't know where he is," he said in a slightly broken English. The guy begins to describe a guy who matches his own description. "Nope, sorry, I don't know anyone around here who matches that description," I said. The guy then asked me if I was Irish because of my accent, which I tell him I'm not. He asks me how long I've been living in the area, and I reply with, "My whole life." He then begins to ask me more things about myself. I find this extremely weird, since he had now stopped asking for directions. "Do you know what house number your friend stays at or anything?" I asked. The guy stops and stares at me for a moment, then says, "Look, I'll be honest. I don't have friends who live in area. I saw you in store and thought you looked interesting. I've seen you before, actually." I laughed awkwardly and mentally prepared myself to start running at any moment if anything happened. But I knew I couldn't outrun a car. "You just look so interesting. I wanted to know more about you. I had to find a way to approach you. You're just so... You know, I fancy you so much. I had to talk to you. I have been seeing you walking your dogs too. You ran before I could talk to you then." I'm horrified at this point, and just stand there like an idiot mentally freaking out. "How old are you?" he asks. Without hesitation I lied and said 16, in the hopes it would scare him off. He hints his steering wheel with his fists and says, "Too damn young. Are you sure you're 16? I nod and walk away, trying to keep my cool, making sure I wait for the sound of a car leaving before I reach for my phone, which was in my back jean pocket. I immediately text my recently ex-boyfriend freaking out over what happened and tell him everything. He keeps messaging me and makes sure I got home safely. Not only had this guy been watching me walk my dogs and pretty much confirmed that he was the guy behind the tree, but this guy has been watching me long enough to know the route I take home, despite not leaving my house very often or venturing far from my house when I do go out. I hope that the fact I lied about my age will keep him away and ensure that we never meet again. I have been going to Disneyland since I was 5 and am now 18. I was at the park once when I was 13 with my mum and my sister, and we elected to go on the Haunted Mansion. So we wait in line, get on the ride. My mum and sister got on one doom buggy, and I got on another by myself. We go through the ride, and everything is going great until we reach the hitchhiking ghost part of the ride near the end. This is where things get good. Right when we enter the room, the ride stops. Okay, they stopped the ride all the time. They're just helping someone off, I said. So I'm sitting there waiting for the ride to start up again when I suddenly feel someone push on my right shoulder. I could clearly feel a palm and fingers when I got pushed, and I spin around really quick to look, but see no one. It couldn't have been my mom or my sister, because when you enter the room, the cars turn left, and if they tried to touch me, they wouldn't have been able to reach me if they did. Then it would have been on my left shoulder. It also couldn't have been the people behind me, because the doom buggies behind me were in a straight line, and they also wouldn't have been able to reach me. The only way for them to touch me is if they'd have gotten out of their car and to push me. But I would have caught them climbing back into the car. It couldn't have been a cast member because they would have had to have walked right in front of me to even get to the side of my doom buggy, and I would have seen them, of course. The next day, I hop onto the computer and start doing some research about deaths in the park and ghosts. And no sooner had I started looking, did I stumble across a story about a kid that perished on the ride. According to the story, the kid was at the park attending grad night. While on the ride, he decided to exit his doom buggy and walk around and view the different rooms and special effects. While he was doing this, he came upon a staircase that he did not see and fell down the stairs. The stairs were painted black, so it was impossible to see them unless you had a flashlight. He broke his neck, and that was the end. Since then, people have reported cold spots and being touched or shoved in the hitchhiking ghosts section of the ride. When I read that, I thought to myself, I just experienced a ghost. In my many visits back to the park after that, I always hoped that I would experience something like that again, but I never, ever did. I remember the day very vividly. I was in first grade, my sister in preschool. My dad was out at work for the day, and my mum, who's a stay-at-home mum, was home with my sister and I. My mum had gone upstairs to shower, since it was morning, while my sister and I were downstairs on the couch watching Bob the Builder. My sister went outside to the car to grab something. The way my house is set up is that our family room, where we were watching TV, connects to our kitchen, which connects to our garage. In order to get to the car outside, my sister opened up the door leading to the garage, then opened up the garage door by pushing a button. She then walked out to the car, retrieved whatever she needed, and came back in. I guess she didn't push the button to close the garage door, and she must have left the door leading inside from the garage unlocked. Well, she was 4. And she didn't think anything of it. About a half hour elapses, and my mum comes downstairs frantically with a towel around, asking if we had taken her jewellery from her upstairs bedroom. Certainly not me. Although I was a 6-year-old girl, I wasn't interested in jewellery. My sister assured my mum she didn't take it either. Then my mum had asked if I was upstairs at all while she was washing up. No, I was downstairs watching TV with my sister. Why? She told me she had heard footsteps, and whilst was in the shower, had called out my name, but we didn't respond. At this point, I was a very good whistler, and my parents knew that I could whistle. My sister, however, couldn't blow a sound. Well, if it wasn't my sister and it wasn't me, who could have taken all her jewellery from my mum's jewellery box, even the one which she had lost the key to? My mum wrangled my sister and I outside the house in panic, still with only a towel over her, and she phoned the police and my dad. She asked my sister, "Are you sure you didn't take it? Or that your friends and you yesterday didn't play with it?" Again, my sister said no. A police officer came and searched the house and my mum's room. Being 6, I was curious and confused, so I asked some of the officers what they were doing, and kindly they explained the procedure. We never ended up finding out who the criminal was. They must have come through the garage door, which meant they would have passed my sister and me sitting on the couch. Luckily, they only wanted jewellery and not to take children, because the committer could have easily taken us as well while my mum was busy showering. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they'd have taken us. Many of our friends and family told my parents that it could have been the painter we hired. We were getting the house painted that summer, and we trusted the man painting our house, so we would leave him alone while we went out for lunch or on our boat. Since the robbery, I've been skittish home alone. We got an alarm system, better locks, and a guard dog that same year. I would have terrible thoughts after the experience that a man would come through my window and hurt me, or sneak into the house again. My dad would have to show me videos of our breed of guard dog attacking people with protective clothes on, so that I could see my dog would defend us. To this day, I hate being home alone. The slightest sound sets me on edge, and I'll reach for the nearest bat or anything I could to defend myself while I search the house. My mum also had a tough time afterwards vacuuming the house alone, since she wanted to hear every sound. So to the man that burglarized my home, took all my mother's childhood jewelry and special jewelry, let's not meet again. I lived for a short while in an ex-Yugoslav country in the Baltics. There I met a bunch of totally weird men that I still can't comprehend. Some of it was culture shock, but most, I still maintain, was borderline illegal. I was volunteering in a youth center and lived less than a 2-minute walk away on the main road and across a small car park. I was 19 at the time. This story begins 40 kilometers away in another town, where myself and quite a few other volunteers from around the country were invited to a party early in my placement. We were given cheap, local bootleg spirits as a welcome, which was particularly potent. I blacked out during the night but was totally safe, and I came to at a friend's apartment, where a couple of people had also crashed. It was about 6 a.m, and my train had been at 4 a.m, so obviously I panicked. Taking stock, I discovered I had no shoes, and my friend who had come with me had left without me, and taken my purse, phone, and train ticket. I was totally stranded. One of the people who was there was an older guy. He offered to find me some shoes. Feeling a little worse for wear, I let him help me. He wasn't a total random. He worked with the local volunteer who was my friend. He took me to his home, and I noticed toys laying around his front room. He told me that he lived with his parents, so I asked him if they belonged to a sibling. Nope, they were his daughters. None of the shoes fitted me, so we went to a friend of his. She gave me some seriously beaten up Converses, and I offered to pay for them, but she said that she had literally just pulled them out the trash. The guy then took me home. I offered to pay him as he mentioned he was a taxi driver, and it was 40 kilometers. He just told me that I didn't have enough money, and this is where it got weird. He got my phone number off another volunteer who thought she was setting us up. He rang me that night and the next, inviting me for cocktails. I declined politely. The third night, I walked home late from work, totally exhausted, and saw that his car was parked in the car park. I said hi, and he invited me for cocktails again, and said he hadn't known when I was getting home, so he'd driven there and waited for me to get back. He'd waited 3 hours. I again declined, now totally spooked, and rushed inside where my apartment building had security doors. The next night he was there again outside my house. It was raining, so he didn't get out of his car, but he rolled down the window and waved me over, telling me how beautiful I was, and how it was lovely spending time the night before. I went inside again. My phone wouldn't stop ringing that night, with his number each time. The next day I went into my boss's office and found him there chatting to her. He'd come on some official business between the two youth centers, though even my boss, not having a clue on the connection between us, said it was strange that he'd come by, because they normally posted these sort of documents to each other. When she realized the town he was from was the one I'd been to over the weekend, she asked if we'd met. He just looked at me and said, "I thought I recognized you." He phoned that night one last time and asked him why I wasn't talking to him. I pointed out that he'd turned up on my doorstep and at my work unannounced. I didn't know him that well, and he blamed it on me being an uptight English girl. And thankfully, I never heard from him again. I'm 19 years old. I work at a small amusement park in a semi-rural area, which generally will generate a good amount of people coming. This happened during the summer season, so we were open until 9 p.m, but we generally only have at most 10 families at around 6:30 to 7. I mostly work outside as a ride attendant, so I get a lot of customer interaction from people all the time and don't usually think much of it. I had to come to work at around 3 p.m, and my day was going normally. At 3:30 I was running one of those roller coasters which has a big box for the operator to run the ride from. These two kids show up. One looked around 8 and the other looked 15. They seemed very sweet and funny, so I was just enthusiastically telling them the rules and being as kind as I possibly could so they could enjoy themselves. As soon as the ride would finish, they'd run from the exit right back in line and go again, which isn't unusual because I get kids do that all the time. Sometimes I'll even have kids who do it over and over again for an hour or so. Soon enough, they stopped riding and waved me off as they ran to some other rides to have fun. At some point afterwards, one of my co-workers came up to switch positions with me and set me off to a tilt-a-whirl, which is another ride we have. As I'm walking down, I see from a distance a man wearing a black shirt, standing at our gem mining station. It's just a smallish water town that constantly generates water, so kids can sift through sand and get cool rocks and stuff. He was just holding his hand in the water, so I was going to ignore him as I made my way to my ride. As I'm getting closer, he looks up at me and asks for my name. I couldn't lie about it as I had a name tag on, so I just told him, and proceeds to say, "Do you think I can see you later tonight?" "No," I reply, and walk away to the ride I was operating, and casually told a co-worker about what happened. We laughed it off as if it were nothing, and I sent him on his way to the ride he had to run. Not 5 minutes later, the guy shows up with the two kids who I let on the roller coaster, the one I was previously running. I'm of course not looking forward to letting him on, but toughed it out since the kids were just trying to have fun. They walked up to the entrance of the ride, and I asked the man if he could hold the fence door open as I scanned his wristband. The fence door opened inwards, and the scanner is on the opposite side, so I asked customers to hold it open in order for them not to block it as they go on. "Of course," he responds. "I'll do anything for you. Whatever you want." As I scanned their wristbands, the scanner showed them that they had run out of credits, so I made sure to tell them. The younger kid with him looked upset, and I told them they could go on this ride this one time, and then they could just go talk to the front counter after. I put them on, explained the rules of the ride, and ran it as usual. The entire time that the ride was operating, I noticed the man was staring at me. He never let his eyes off me, so I tried my hardest to avert his gaze. I tried not to seem alarmed, because his kids were in the other carts joking around and making funny faces and gestures at me, trying to make me laugh, so I pretended not to notice. Once the ride had come to a complete stop, the youngest kid stood up and said he wanted to go again. I felt bad for him, and since there weren't any people in line, I told him he could go on again. The older kid felt dizzy, so he just got off the ride while the man and younger child stayed on. It ran again, and I noticed that the man wasn't letting his gaze off me. Towards the end of the ride, I saw he was lifting his lap bar up, so I told him to leave it down, as it acts as a second brake to slow down individual carts. Later, the ride came to a stop. I look over and tell him about the front counter, only to notice that he had put his hands in his pants to make his crotch more noticeable. I was highly disturbed, of course, because I was literally not trying to be forced to look at some dude's excited phase, and I quickly made sure they left and just avoided looking at the man the entire time. After that, I had no more customers, and made sure to go to my supervisor at the time and explain to her what happened. But she didn't know what the guy looked like, just what his older son looked like, and as I was telling her, she saw the older son in the parking lot leave, so we assumed that they were gone for good at that point, and we went back to business as usual. I was still on edge because I was super uncomfortable, but I just spoke to my co-workers to pass the time. At around 6 or so, my supervisor asked me to take cardboard down to the dumpster. I went down alone, and there weren't many people nearby. The dumpster is near some rides, so you could see what was going on from other points in the park. As I'm throwing the cardboard away, I noticed a figure walking down towards the dumpster and see that it's the same guy from earlier. He'd come back to the park again, and I start to freak out because I didn't have a walkie-talkie on me, and there wasn't anyone nearby to do anything. He kept walking closer and closer, eyeballing me every so often, as I internally start panicking and getting increasingly nervous. I thought in that moment that I was going to be kidnapped, and I didn't even know what to do. Thankfully, my supervisor saw him from a distance and started speed walking in my direction. She walked right past him before he could get to me, and he did a double take and just stood there as if he wasn't walking towards me. She walked me back up and told me that she didn't know if that was the guy, but didn't want to leave me there alone. She switched me to another ride and said she'd make sure he didn't follow me around. She had told some other co-workers about what happened, and a co-worker from before made sure to stay near me because the guy kept lingering at areas that I was near and trying to be near me when he thought my guard was down. Every time my co-worker thought he was getting too close, they'd stand near me to make sure he left me alone. At some point, his youngest kid came to the ride I was operating and stayed on until closing time came about, so the guy was nearby for a lot of the time. Towards closing, I was offered a ride home from a co-worker because he didn't want me to go to the parking lot alone. As we went outside, we sit on the stairs with some other co-workers, and we noticed this car that was still there, even though at that point we had been closed for 45 minutes. The guy was still there, with his family and everything, just lingering. There were no other cars in the customer car park except for them, so I assumed this dude had to have some of his own family involved, because he was just waiting there. I can't see any other reason he'd be there. It felt too coincidental that his family so happened to stay later than they had to. I kept nervously looking over and looking to see what he was doing, and he was just staring in our direction as he sat while his whole family did other stuff. Thankfully, at some point they had left, but I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable at the thought of it. I was just completely alone when I left. I'm so glad I have some responsible and caring co-workers, because if not, I have no idea what would have happened. I was in 4th grade in the late 80s, although, as kids, we felt mostly invincible. There was this kind of mild horror that surrounds everything. It was the tail end of satanic panic. Getting an apple in your trick-or-treat bag meant razor blade. Every single white van that drove by was trying to take you. My brother and I spent one Sunday sitting on the front porch, crouched behind the wrought iron railing, bored and looking for anything to do. We'd exhausted the library book my mum let us borrow about secret codes. We somehow got it in our head to start writing down license plates and making models of cars. It was mostly curiosity, but we kept seeing this one number over and over again. Of course, it was a white van. We told our parents, and they kind of exchanged glances. My dad asked us to describe the driver, and he said he knew the guy. Our town was small, so it made sense. Thinking back, I'm betting he just didn't want us to worry. Also, who writes down license plate numbers? We were weirdos. The morning after, I heard my dog barking in the way he did when he was angry and defensive. He only did this when there was a threat nearby, and all the adults were acting off. It was whispered, but my uncle told my dad, "I'm staying home from work. Someone is watching the house." The flyer that they passed around my class that day had a police sketch type drawing of a guy who was a suspicious person hanging around the school. The flyer said, "To be aware and don't let your children walk home alone." The drawing looked like any other regular guy. Our parents made us memorize code words in case someone non-family needed to pick us up. I usually walked home, but my mum stopped letting me. At school we had this thing at recess. The doors at the school were super heavy and locked from the inside as soon as they closed. So our teacher would have one of us hold the door for the 20-minute period while everyone else was running around. It was somewhat of a status symbol among 9-year-olds. Whoever was holding the door was very important. During recess, kids would come up and chat with you, and it was understood that you were like the assistant teacher in a sense. My friends kept coming up and telling me that a guy was throwing rocks from the woods. They were excited and terrified, and it didn't take long for teachers to notice and quickly usher the class back inside. The next day, we went up behind the baseball diamond. It was creepy near the woods, but you could see the houses beyond the line of trees, so I figured we were okay. I remember my best friend shouting, and there were dozens of Polaroids scattered on the ground near the pitcher's mound. They were all of kids, some repeats, some different. The only common thing was that all of the faces were scribbled out violently with a black Sharpie. I didn't want to touch them. It made me feel sick and dizzy. We went home and told our parents. They mostly rolled their eyes at us and said we were being dramatic. My mum seemed concerned, but I don't think anything ever came of it. And when I ask her now, she apparently doesn't remember. I work at a grocery store as a cashier, and I've met so many different types of people that I'd rather not meet again. But this one takes the cake for sure. The store I work at is open 24 hours, and this was one of the first times I had to work the night shift. Most people don't do grocery shopping past 10 PM, so night shifts are usually just one cashier and one manager. My manager was in her office, and I was on my phone trying my best to stay awake. Since I don't usually work night shifts, I was struggling a little bit more once it hit me about 12:30 AM. It wasn't busy, and the parking lot was desolate except for my car, my manager's car, and another car sitting by the line of shopping carts. The car was running with the headlights off, but with the interior lights on and a fairly large bald dude sitting hunched over with his hands firmly holding the top of the steering wheel and staring inside the store. I was very startled by this because of how eerie and creepy it felt. After a few seconds of me staring back at him, he turned his car off and the interior lights and got out of the car. He started walking around to grab a card. I wrote it off as maybe he didn't know that we were 24 hours and was trying to read the sign on the door. I ignored the fact that he would have needed his headlights on to read it. He came into the store and started scanning the aisles. I went back on my phone because if it was just an average Joe, then I didn't want him to feel uncomfortable. About 15 to 20 minutes pass, and he comes up to the checkout with a cart full, and I mean full, of jars of mayonnaise and a single vegetable platter. This was so confusing, but I tried not to be judgmental. He took a little while to start unloading the cart because he was scanning the magazine racks that most registers have right there at the checkout. We grabbed one of those teen celebrity magazines, like 17 or J14 or something, which didn't really help in the creep factor. He started unloading the cart, and I scanned the jars as soon as they came up, so that we could get this over as fast as possible. He greeted me with, "Hey, how are you, young lady?" But he said that in a Daffy Duck voice. I was beginning to get more scared rather than creeped out. I ignored it and asked him if he had a rewards card for our store. He said no in a normal voice, and I gave him the total of his transaction, and he fumbled around in his pockets for his wallet. He asked me if I liked his impression and if it was good. Honestly, the impression was pretty spot on, which is why it was freaking me out so much. I told him that it was good, while trying to stay polite and calm. He handed me some cash, and I opened the register to get his change. As I was handing him the change, he held onto my hand and leaned over the credit card machine and asked me if I'd ever been to a party with that much mayonnaise. I said no and pulled my hand away, which he reluctantly let go of. He was still leaning over the credit card machine and said, "Well, I won't get into too much detail, but let's just say it's not for the veggies." He winked and put his change in his wallet and began taking his grocery bags and putting them in his cart. He began acting like he was in pain and asked me to help him put the bags in his car. I was not about to do that because this guy was beyond creepy. I told him that I wasn't allowed to leave the register because I was the only one working. He tried to push it, but I told him again that I wasn't allowed to leave. I don't know if that was actually a rule, and honestly neither did I, but I used it as an excuse just to not to go with him. He gave me a puppy dog face and pleaded with his hands, and I told him once again that I was not allowed to leave, and that if he didn't stop I would call my manager down. He stopped immediately, scoffed at me, and left without another word. He loaded his car and left the cart in the parking lot. It was close enough though to the line of carts that was right next to his car, as I'm assuming he probably wanted to see if I would come out and put it back, but I wasn't going to do that. He got into his car, turned it on, assumed the same position he had been in before, and I called my manager down after 3 minutes of him just staring. She came down, looked out the window, and he drove away. I told her everything that happened, and she said that I was in the right by not giving him what he wanted, and that if I saw him again to call the cops. Apparently this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this during the night shift to a couple of other female co-workers. Needless to say, I made sure I never had another encounter on the night shift again after that. I was about 10 years old in Disney World. It was my second time going, and I was finally tall enough to ride the Rockin' Roller Coaster. My parents and I were in line, and we got through pretty quickly because there weren't a ton of people in that line that day. We got to the part of the line where we had to go in an elevator to get to the actual docking point. We were in there with one other lady. This is the creepy lady. She was mid-30s and a little bit chubby. I like to move a lot, so I wasn't standing directly next to my parents, which was a mistake. This lady talked to us immediately. That in itself isn't that strange. We figured that she was just social, and she started telling us about her kids and her whole life story. As if that wasn't strange enough, she grabbed me and pulled me back against her as I was facing the other way and hugged me from behind. At this point, I'm extremely uncomfortable, and my parents are unsettled as well. My mum tells me to come here, but the lady just says something along the lines of, "Oh, she doesn't care, we're friends, right?" Once the elevator opened, she let me go. My parents and I walked away pretty fast. It was a pretty unnerving experience. A while back, when I was 14 or so, a group of friends and I went out downtown to do a bit of cosplay photo shoot. We were all dressed pretty crazy, so it wasn't a huge surprise that it drew in a bit of attention. Not a big deal really. We were cool with answering questions about what we were doing and all. We went to a market in the center of downtown for lunch, and once we finished, half of us went to the washroom and the others waited outside the market and began discussing the best place to take photos. A man approaches us, wanting to know if there was an event going on and why we were dressed that way. A second older man also approached us, standing next to the first guy, and just listens to our conversation. As our conversation dies down, the older man begins to act kind of weird, fidgety, and twitching awkwardly, and looking around quickly. Then he smiles at me very creepily and asks if he could kiss me. My immediate reaction as a 14-year-old boy with major anxiety is to quietly say, "No thank you," and hope that was the end of it. It wasn't. The older man takes a step towards me again and asks, adding a please. My friend asks the other younger man if he knew the guy, and if they could please leave us alone. The guy apologizes and says he doesn't know the dude, but tries to tell him he should leave us alone. The older man is having none of it, ignoring everyone and taking another step towards me, now demanding that I let him kiss me. I said no again, taking a step back, and suddenly the guy nearly lunges at me. I bolted back into the market, trying to hide in the large crowd, making my way upstairs and collapsing in a corner to cry. Because that whole experience at 14 is absolutely horrifying. My friends eventually found me, calmed me down, and we decided that the market wasn't a safe place to be in at the moment. So we left, walking to a mall about 7 to 8 blocks away. We walk around for a bit, and I'm finally enjoying myself and calmed down, until I turn the corner to see the same old creep from earlier walking 10 feet behind us. As soon as he notices that I saw him, he gives the same creepy smile as before and begins his approach towards us. We scatter, running off, finally losing him and deciding it would be best to go home and do this photo shoot another day somewhere safer. I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. The next nearest neighborhood is over 4 miles away. One night a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. So far from the main road and on the weekend, I knew that our roads would remain unplowed for quite some time. I went to my back deck door to admire the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries, when I noticed footprints leading to my door, and then turning around and leaving. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbor's side, and thought that one of their more delinquent kids played a joke as my sledding tube on the rail was popped. I decided I'd wait till later, as it was too early to call their parents. I went on Facebook after scrolling for a bit, and noticed one of my neighbors closer to the entrance posted, "Did someone knock for me or something at the back door?" I immediately called her and told her that I had an idea. I called the first house on the entrance and told him what was going on. He went and checked, and sure enough, they were there too. Everyone started calling everyone else. I called the family at the far end, and they told me there was none there. Then I got a call from my next door neighbor. She called the woman that lives next to the end house, and she said that there were footprints that led to her door, but none that led away. We already called the police at this point, but we now called them back and said it's an emergency. They told us that the roads were still all unplowed, and they can't send a plow truck to clear the way as they're a privately owned company. The woman was losing it, so one of the husbands, who's a huge bear of the man from across the road, texted her to say he was coming over, to invite her over. He came and she left. We put up one guy's live feed motion recording hunting cameras facing all exits. Nothing came out. At around 7 p.m, a plow truck came as well as 3 cop cars. The couple she was staying with and her went to her house and stood in the doorway as the police searched. They found nothing, and she begged them to keep looking, so they did. 2 of the cops went into the basement again. This time only one came up. He took her to the side room, and we could hear hysterical crying. Me and a few of the other guys started towards the door when several police confronted us. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that she didn't even know existed. A few minutes later, a scruffy man came out kicking and screaming in cuffs and was led away. In his little camp, they found blankets she just cleaned and put away, in the next room to hers. She stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone and sold the house next summer. He turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for assault against a family member. The cops told us that they feel like he didn't want to stay at his apartment after a fight with his roommate and drove off in his roommate's car from the county over and got stuck on our unplowed roads. We all were called as witnesses in the case, and he took some electronics from her basement. But we couldn't get him on that since he never left with the stuff. It was about 4 months of court. Anyway, this is why you lock your doors. I was around 15, and I was on vacation at Walt Disney World sometime during the summer. My family has the vacation club membership, so we go a few times a year and live nearby. We were staying in the vacation club villas, which is a separate building from the main hotel. I brought 2 of my friends, Savannah and Victoria, and we got bored at around 2 a.m, so we went down to the gym. We weren't even going to work out. We were just going to take mirror selfies and mess around with the exercise balls. There's a desk for the spa portion of the gym, and since it was late there were no employees. So we were messing around behind the desk and found a notebook. I'm not sure why, I was super annoying at the time, but I decided to write my Twitter and Instagram handles, and did. Looking back, I'm pretty sure we could get in trouble since guests aren't supposed to mess around with the desks. I didn't think much of it as we left the gym, and the next morning we checked out of the hotel. On the drive back home, I get a Twitter notification, and it's from a diaper fetish account. The creepy thing is this account was active for a while and had disgusting pictures of grown men in diapers and other disturbing pictures of children. So does Savannah, and we both wrote our names in that book. We both sit there looking at each other. The account tweeted at us saying something like, "I know who you are and what you've done, and your vacation will end abruptly." They tweeted some more creepy stuff like that, telling us to watch our backs, but I knew it was clearly because we left our names on the notepad. I didn't reply. Then I noticed a new follower, and it was my name, but the username was similar to the diaper account. The account started tweeting my address, phone number, and random pictures of me from deep in my social media. They do the same thing with Savannah's name, and at this point we're both crapping ourselves. I receive a text from a random number, and I'm assuming they used a texting app saying that they were watching us and knew more than we thought. They even started texting me about my boyfriend at the time and asked me really messed up questions about him. I told them to piss off and blocked it. I didn't get any more texts, but the Twitter account continued to tweet about me, random details that I know they had to dig deep to find. I blocked them on that too, and put all my accounts on private. I never got any more messages, but the Twitter accounts are still up to this day. So to the Disney employee with a diaper fetish, stay away from me. This occurred when I was about 7 to 8 years old, and is a story that I only just recently remembered. It was summertime, and my mom was having a garage sale in our driveway. Her, me, my brother, who was aged 4 or 5 at the time, and my grandmother, my mother's mum, were all seated inside of the garage during the sale. Me and my brother, of course, had been playing a bit though, running from our yard and then back to our driveway and such. We had a few visitors, but it was one woman who was responsible for this story. She was older, about 70-something, and walked with a limp. I remember this because she had a cane. She was on foot and was carrying nothing but a small red toolbox, not a lunchbox, a literal metal toolbox. She carried things inside of that you could hear clanging around. My dad had one just like it when I was a kid, that I wasn't allowed to touch because he was a plumber and didn't want me or my brother near his expensive tool set. So I found it strange that she was just walking around with it. She didn't greet us. She just started picking things up and looking at them. My mum decided to initiate conversation, and this is how it went. "Hi, good morning. Do you have anything for free?" "Excuse me?" "Items I can pick up. Like this. Is this for free?" "No, sorry. Everything has a sticker on it with a price." "Why is it not free?" It's a garage sale. I'm trying to sell things." It was at this point the lady went quiet, and my mum just stood up staring at her. My grandma called me and my brother to sit behind her, and we watched and waited for something else to happen. The woman set her toolbox on one of our tables and opened it up to reveal a bunch of random things. Little trinkets, loose change, actual tools. She had everything from Kleenex to quarters. It was weird. She motioned towards a small group of figurines my mum was selling and asked if she could have one for free. At this point, my mum was getting annoyed and wanted this lady to leave. She said so, and the woman started walking towards us. She said something about how cute me and my brother were as we sat ducking behind my grandmother's chair. She started walking into our garage, and my mum told her to stop and repeated that she should leave. She said something else about me and my brother, and asked if we liked her trinkets while she stood staring at us. And my grandma chimed in that she would call the police if the woman didn't leave. She then slowly turned around, walking back to her toolbox, lifting up one of the figurines and very obviously putting it in the box without paying for it. My mum didn't fight her, just told her to leave now. So she did. She wandered up and down our street away from our driveway, but within eyesight. We kept an eye on her for the rest of the day as she roamed around our neighborhood and surrounding streets until she finally left. It was super weird, and us kids were advised not to leave our garage sale for the rest of the day. The story continues. About a week later, when me and my brother were playing outside again. We have landscaping around our house, which are rocks that have flower planters and birdhouses, nothing too spectacular, and it wasn't unusual for me and my brother to climb and stand on these rocks as kids. We started walking around my house to do this, and then went inside to get a drink or something of a sort. We weren't gone for more than a few minutes when we came back outside and returned to the exact spot that we had just been in, and immediately noticed that woman with the same bright red toolbox sitting on top of one of the rocks in our landscape. I ran back inside with my brother to inform our parents. My dad went outside to retrieve the toolbox, and it was the same that the woman had had, with her items still stored inside. I hadn't seen her since the garage sale, and still never have, but somehow she managed to leave that toolbox there without being noticed, which meant she had to have been watching and waiting for the ideal moment. The creepiest part is that our yard is away from our garage. In order to get to that part of our landscaping, you would have to go up our driveway and literally walk across the entire length of our lawn and front of our house, and then to the side in order to place it there, since we have thick hedges blocking the rest of our yard from the public. We have two big windows on the front and side of our house that were open, which just creeps me out more when I think she could have been watching us from the outside. I don't remember what my parents did with said toolbox. I'm pretty sure they threw it away. None of us have seen that woman again. Also, there's no chance that we missed the toolbox the first time round. It was bright red and literally within our walking path, and I noticed it was there as soon as I turned the corner of our yard. There was no missing it. I don't know what her intentions were, but I'm glad we haven't encountered her since. Toolbox lady, let's not meet again. This happened about 6 years ago, when I lived in Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville is a pretty ghetto city for the most part, and when this happened to me, I lived right smack in the middle of one. Across the street from my house, there was a neighborhood park, and it was always bursting with numerous children, as parks usually do. The day this happened was a nice sunny afternoon. The park had a water spout and everything, and it was up and running, and of course, little naive me was over there living it up. However, something seemed off. For one, I was literally the only kid in the park. Where was everyone else? I couldn't say. There were no special events going on. It was just a sunny day, so you'd expect there to be scores of kids, but no. I was the only soul there. Not even anyone out on their porches or anything. Even my dad was inside minding his own business. No cars were out driving either. It was eerie as hell. I've established the setting, and I'm standing there all alone playing in the water, with not another person to be found anywhere except for the maintenance waterman. I'm standing right on the water spout, soaking up all the H2O, and in my blurred vision I see a man of 5'9" approaching. I immediately back out of the water and rub my eyes to get a look at him. He's about 40 to 50 years old. He's clearly approaching me, and I stand there and let him address me. Mind you, I'm a little kid, and like I said, I was naive, so I'm trying to be polite and not ignore an adult. "Having fun?" he says. "Yeah." Great. You mind coming and helping me with something? I need to get some work done on these pipes and I could use your help. I simply reply by saying, contemplating if I should trust this man or not. Noticing my ambivalence, he starts towards me again, as if he's gonna grab my wrist and take me with him, saying things like, "Come on, it'll only be a minute." He's about 6 feet from me, when I turn around and bolt towards my house across the street. I don't even look back to see if he's giving chase. I just run. I made it across, darted inside, and told my dad. We both look out, but he's nowhere to be seen. I didn't know who this guy was, and I didn't see if he was a well-known predator on the news or something. Was he the reason no one else was out there that day? Did everyone else know that he had been spotted? Was he really a maintenance man who needed a 9-year-old's help? I don't know, but I do know that the water maintenance man at the park on Rodman Street in Louisville, Kentucky. So let's not meet again. I work overnights at a hotel in a seedy area. I'm female and work the night audit. My personality is that of an unapproachable shrew, with the look of a sultry, overworked hotel employee. I'm currently awaiting for the police to show up so I can make my statement. It was so sudden and abrupt that I'm still shaking. An inebriated man was outside with his attractive girlfriend having a cigarette, being loud and overall being disgustingly affectionate. I remember asking myself, why are you outside doing this when you can just pay money for a place to do the exact thing in? Which I was pretty sure they'd already done. While they're doing this, unknowingly to them, I noticed a man wearing an army uniform walking towards them at a very steady pace. The army man stops right next to the inebriated guy, puts his hand on his shoulder, and says something, which I assume is bumming a cigarette. Regardless, the inebriated man stops what he's doing and starts to fumble around his pockets. I guess the man had a cigarette because he went to extend his hand out to the soldier, and all of a sudden, a red 4-door something speaks around the corner like a bat out of hell. It stops right in front of the man, and the armed guy pushes the man aside while holding his wrist, and the woman is pulled into the car, and then the inebriated man was thrown in, and they jump and they drive off. I observed all of this from my front desk, and there was nothing I could do. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how quick I could have gotten to her, I would not have been fast enough with the situation that had just taken place. So to the soldier and the people in the red car, let's never, ever meet. It was around 12 AM, and I was sitting by myself at a cosplay rave in the chairs, instead of dancing, while my friends were in the crowd. This is because I tire very easily, and do enjoy listening to the music and watching people have fun. A guy dressed as a certain Jedi came up to me. I'd met him earlier. He found me sitting off to the side of a hallway in a corner recharging, and tried to strike up a conversation. I'd faced away the entire time, and gave him one-word replies because I was clearly tired and uninterested. I have autism and get worn down quickly, especially in crowds, and I informed the guy that I was tired. A guy friend running a DJ booth nearby came over when he noticed the unwanted company, hugged and kissed me on the cheek while shooing away the Jedi look-alike. He told me later he wanted to send the guy "she's taken" vibes to ward him off. However, the Jedi guy was unfazed. He did eventually wander away to an event, much to my relief. But here he was again, somehow able to recognize me under my new character's extreme face makeup, although I hardly recognized him. I wouldn't have, as I'm nearly face blind, if it wasn't for the costume. It was pretty dark in the rave too. He asked me if I wanted to dance and I said no, but he insisted. I continued saying no. Then he asked me if I wanted to go up to his hotel room with him. Again, no. He didn't like my answer, so he grabbed my wrist and yanked me out of my chair and started dragging me towards the exit. As I pulled back hard in clear resistance like a game of tug-of-war with my arm as the rope, but it wasn't working. So I balled my free hand into a fist and started mentally counting down from 5, because I was just about to happily sucker punch him in his face. The 5-second countdown buffer was to give him a chance to stop being stupid, though I really should have just given it to him straight away. I'm small but have taken martial arts, and have no problem crossing justified sucker punch off my list. As soon as I hit 1, my friends showed up for their routine checkup on the introvert, and they all have looks of horror drawn on their faces. He lets go immediately and took off into the crowd. I knew I should have started my countdown earlier, and thankfully that was the last I saw of that creeper. I was 16 at the time, and my first job was at a local amusement park. At the time, I weighed around 120 pounds and was 5'7". It was a pretty boring and lonely job. My boss never let me talk to the other workers in the other shops. That's why she moved me to one of the retail shops all the way across the park, which is pretty dangerous because I have no one else around me. I was standing outside the entrance to my shop to get some fresh air, and I saw a guy walking by with a really nice camera. I asked him a few questions about it, since I was trying to save up to buy a GoPro for my trip to the Dominican Republic that summer. We striked up a conversation about the camera, and then it started to rain. He came into my shop and looked around while I was just hanging out at my register. This man was about 50 to 60 years old and pretty nice, but this is when things got a little weird. He asked me what I wanted to do when I got older. At the time, I wanted to be a special effects makeup artist, so that's what I told him. He said that he had a friend that needed someone to do makeup for him for this movie. Then he asked if I was interested, and I had to come up with some excuse as to why I didn't want to do it or give him my personal email address, which he asked for. I told him that my mum wouldn't allow me to do that, especially with a man that I didn't know. I bet you're all wondering why I didn't call security or anything like that. Well, I can't call security unless I feel threatened, which I didn't. This guy was very calm and collected, but downright creepy. When I stopped talking to him for a bit to text my manager at the time, he walked over to my register and just stayed there trapping me in the corner. I quickly text my manager, "Help, there's a guy in my store that won't leave," and I tried to do that quickly so that he wouldn't see. After standing at my register for a few minutes in silence, he walked over to the wall to look at stuff and pretended to be occupied while other customers walked in. That's when he asked to take a photo of me. I got so weirded out, I said, "Sure," and he snapped the picture. I gave this really weird look in it because I was truly weirded out, and a few minutes after, my manager walked in to tell me that we were going to close. I was so happy, but that's not the end of it. It was 9 at night, and the man wouldn't leave even when my manager was in there. He stayed there for 2 more hours, and it wasn't until 11 when my manager kind of told him to leave that he walked out, and she turns to me. "Was that your dad?" "Hell no, I don't even know the guy." She was shocked and very creeped out, as was I. I closed the garage door to the shop and stayed inside to count the money, and as soon as we were about to leave, we look outside the window to see if he's still there, and he was. He was waiting in his vehicle for me to leave. We had to call some of the other managers down to where I was in the pouring rain to escort me to the building on the other side of the park. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I'd have walked back to the building alone. Maybe he would have taken me, or tried to do something unspeakable. But I really don't want to know. I am just so thankful my manager and everyone else who helped me through that nightmare was there. And for the record, I quit right after that. This happened around 6 months ago. So a little backstory. The way my backyard is, it leads to my garage. My backyard is more of a deck. Anyway, a few weeks prior to this creepy guy, there were a lot of cops in my area. This is a low crime rate town. Nothing big ever happens here. Maybe a stabbing every 3 years or a shooting every 5. And the cops were looking for this creepy guy. So one night I'm home alone. I'm playing some video games in the basement when I hear a loud bang outside near my garage. So I go upstairs to investigate. I look outside and my garage light is on. I think it's my girlfriend just getting home from work. So I'm standing there for about 5 minutes waiting for her to come through the garage door. Nothing. So I call my girlfriend and ask her if she's home. She tells me she won't be home for an hour. I'm in shock now, because I didn't leave that light on. I ended up calling the police. They came by and checked the garage. They told me someone was in there because everything was thrown about, and the cop that came said he would sit outside my house until my girlfriend got home. My girlfriend arrives and the cop bids me goodbye. I thought maybe it was just some kids. So my girlfriend then goes up to bed while I made some food. I ate, went out for a smoke, and get out my light when I looked towards my gate. That's when I heard a noise at my side gate. I look over and there's some mid-40s guy just staring at me. "What are you doing?" I ask. I think I was in shock. He tries to open my gate. I threw my smoke at him and ran into the house and locked the door. I called the cops and told them what happened, and they came by again 5 minutes later. They told me no one was around, but believed he was there because the gate was wide open. I haven't seen him since, but this sure scared me. This happened when I was around the age of 14. I went to a theme park, Great America, with my older sister who was around the age of 17. She pestered me to go on a ride that I was not comfortable riding at the time, until I finally budged and said I'd go with her. While we stood in line, she and I heard an older dude yelling about his favorite sports team to seemingly nobody. He was with a group of girls, so we assumed he was just having a good time with his friends, but that wasn't the case. Anyway, she and I got on the ride from start to finish. The ride itself was a pirate ship that basically swung back and forth, similar to a pendulum, and eventually started to do complete circles, causing the passenger to hang temporarily upside down. The ride itself isn't really that key to the story, besides the nauseous feeling after the ride. Once I was done, I noticed that the girls that were previously with this dude left because he was yelling and acting a weirdo. I didn't really pay much attention to them because my stomach was acting up, but I guess I should have. At the time, she and I were standing on the top of a bridge, and I told her that I needed a minute. I walked over to the railing of the bridge and leaned over to get some fresh air, basically just trying to feel normal again to ensure I wouldn't throw up on the next ride. And this is when things got weird. While leaning over the railing, I feel big arms suddenly wrap around my waist, and I'm hoisted into the air. Initially, I'm freaked out and trying to comprehend what exactly is happening. All I know is that I'm up in the air, and I'm not sure why. Was whoever had me going to throw me over the bridge? I'm stuck there in fear, and just as quickly as it starts, I'm placed back down onto the ground. I whip around to see the same creepy dude standing there smiling at me. My sister runs over to stand beside me and asks this dude why he'd lifted me into the air. I was in a state of shock and couldn't really speak at the time, with all of this and the nauseousness and all. The following conversation then ensued. Why did you lift him into the air? He looked like he was sick and needed some fresh air. Tell me how lifting someone in the air is going to help with a sickness. How you doing? He tried talking to me at this point. I ignored him, and my sister was doing all the talking. Come on, kid. Look at someone when they talk to you. You bored or something? I bet you're bored on these rides with your sister? Friend? Doesn't matter. I heard her screaming her lungs out on the ride we all went on, and I bet she doesn't even want to go on more scary rides. She's no fun. You'll probably have to go home soon because of her. Note, my sister was screaming a lot on the ride, but she told me that she screams on the rides because it raises her adrenaline levels and causes her to have more fun. Leave him alone. What we do is none of your business. But it is. I want everyone that comes to this park to have a good time. I mean, it's great America. Tell you what, kid, how about you and I go to the water park and ditch your little friend here? She's not going to have much fun getting wet anyway, but trust me, I will. We can both go on the water rides that you want, and afterwards I'll take you wherever you want to grab lunch. I don't know what you all think about an old random man asking a 14-year-old to go out with him, but I instantly thought this dude was trying to take me. So, I feel that this guy is a danger to myself and possibly my sister, so I made a movement to walk away from him. He subtly stepped in front of me to block my exit, again standing on a bridge, so I had to think of another way that I could pass him, and I feign a phone call from my parents and say, "Hi Mum. Oh yeah, we're fine, just getting off the pirate ship ride." "What? You're right near the food court? Oh okay, we're coming, see you in a sec." I said it loud enough that the creep could hear everything that transpired, and with my newfound confidence, push past this guy. We walked away from him and into the direction that I faked my mother was waiting. After about 15 seconds of walking, we broke out into a sprint until we reached the park entrance. We tried to tell the front desk people about the guy, but they said since nothing really happened, they couldn't do anything.